Chapter 984. The next day, Dana dispatched laborers to transform the Moon Hall into a laboratory. A large number of materials were transported to the square outside the hall and piled up. Dean was surprised that the technology of this seemingly ancient shelter wasn't backward at all. It actually had electricity. Of course, this electricity was only in the hands of the upper class. It should be a technology brought from the Eastern Continent Empire. After the transformation of the Moon Hall, Dana devoted herself to the experiment. She called the master of the Scientific Research Institute to be her assistant. Dean was ordered by Dana not to leave the Moon Hall without permission. He could only wander around the hall and think of a way to escape. Since he knew that Dana could tamper with his memory, he had been thinking about how to prevent her from tampering with his memory. He did not want to fall into the same situation as the cold-looking youth. However, no matter how he thought, he felt that there was no solution. After all, Dana knew how to use electricity to avoid the Thunderbird. It could be seen that she could not only access his memory but also grasp all his thoughts. No matter what plan he had, when she read his memory, she would understand it all. My memory should not have been tampered with by her. Otherwise, I would not want to leave her. Dean sat on the stone railing outside the hall. He looked at the golden-armored guards who were moving materials back and forth in front of him. His eyes were lost in thought. He repeatedly recalled all the pictures and details that Dana had taken control of this shelter. Slowly, he found the reason. When Dana tampered with his memory, it should have caused a lot of damage or resistance. This could be seen from the painful expression of the cold-looking youth after his memory was read. He remembered that when he woke up from the hospital bed, there was not much pain. Perhaps it was because of this that Dana did not tamper with Dean's memory. After all, Burrow was next to him. If he behaved strangely, Burrow would know that she had tampered with his memory. Later on, he was always the target of Burrow's attention. Dana could not find the opportunity to contact him and tamper with his memory. After that, he was on the run all the way. Dana also did not have the opportunity to make a move on him. However, when he escaped to the Eastern Continent, Dana had the opportunity to deal with him. However, she did not do it. He did not know the reason. Was it because she knew that he was unable to escape, so she was not afraid? Dean couldn't figure it out. Perhaps there was a deeper reason, but no matter what the reason was, it wouldn't be a good thing for him. She will be on guard against me after the suppression of my magic marks is over. The best way is to tamper with my memory. I must be on guard in advance. Dean silently thought. However, it was easy to say, but how could they guard against it? When Dana wanted to tamper with his memories, his thoughts would be known as well. Even his current thoughts would be understood by Dana, so how could he be on guard against it? Thinking of this, he felt a wave of sorrow in his heart. The memories of my birth have been dug out by her. Even if I make a plan in advance and then forget the plan, it will be detected by her. Damn, she will know my current thoughts and dig deeper. Dean couldn't help but rub his hair. He wanted to twist his head off. It was too annoying and distressing. It was useless to think about it. If he didn't think about it, was he just going to sit and wait for death? He felt even more powerless than when he fell into Burrow's hands. At the very least, his thoughts still belonged to him. Even if he cursed in his heart, Burrow wouldn't know. When he was in a restless mood, he suddenly heard a call from the front. "Young master, young master! Young master, where are you? Young master, come out quickly. Don't scare us." The voice was not pleasant to hear. It was the voice of an out-of-shape woman. Dean was annoyed. He looked towards the direction of the voice and saw a 16 or 17-year-old boy hiding in front of a pile of copper coins. He was dressed in silk and satin clothes. At the moment, he had a smirk on his face, and there was a bit of complacency in his eyes. "Young master is here." A golden-armored guard who was transporting materials saw the boy and immediately called out to the woman. The woman was overjoyed and immediately ran over. When the boy heard someone snitch, he angrily stared at the golden-armored guard. Suddenly, he rushed over, grabbed the guard's hand, and opened his mouth to bite. The golden-armored guard was a little flustered. He quickly hugged the boy and said, "Young master, don't break your teeth." The young man struggled relentlessly, brandishing his claws and baring his fangs as he tried to grab his throat. At this time, the woman had run over and quickly said, "Young master, don't hurt your body." The young man turned to look at her, then at the golden-armored guard in front of him. Suddenly, he sat on the ground, kicked his legs, and cried loudly. He cried like a child, or more accurately, like a baby. The woman seemed to be prepared. She quickly took out a candy and a small puppet from her pocket and handed them to him. "Young master, what do you think this is?" The boy opened his eyes and saw the candy and the puppet. He immediately stopped crying and grabbed them, giggling. The woman and the golden-armored guard were relieved. The golden-armored guard slightly cupped his hands to the woman and left in a hurry, for fear of getting into trouble again. The woman took the boy and patted the dust off his body. "Young master, listen to me. Let's go back. The Candy King is waiting for you. If we don't go back, they will go to war." When the boy heard her words, he immediately became nervous. He grabbed her hand and ran forward. "Young master, slow down," the woman hurriedly shouted. Dean rolled his eyes as he watched their backs gradually go away. He was bored by this episode. He was about to get up and return to the hall. Suddenly, his mind seemed to be hit by something. He was stunned on the spot. "Retard. Fool," he muttered to himself. "Fool, fool," he muttered to himself. His confused eyes gradually became brighter and brighter. He suddenly thought of an existence, mental illness. What is mental illness? Dean had not seriously studied this knowledge, so his understanding was similar to most people. In his opinion, mental illness was a person who was difficult to understand. They were neurotic and had incomprehensible ideas. Yes, it was incomprehensible. How could a normal person understand mental illness? He couldn't help but want to laugh. It was as if he suddenly saw a ray of light in a desperate situation. It turns out that her magic mark ability is not invulnerable. Dean felt that he had accidentally found the flaw of Dana's ability. Although she could read all the memories of others and understand their thoughts, wouldn't Dana herself be disturbed in the process? The answer was, of course, no. Dean thought of Dana's arrogant attitude after reading the memory of the cold-looking youth. It was as if she was a monarch who had been sitting on the throne for a long time. This temperament change was very obvious. He didn't notice it before, but after repeatedly recalling these details, he noticed it. Of course, it was also possible that Dana herself had such temperament. After all, the posture she showed at the beginning had the majesty of a queen. But now it was more obvious. This discovery could not be used as strong evidence. But Dean also firmly believed in another point of view. When you stared at the darkness for a long time, your eyes would adapt to the darkness. In common terms, the more you see, the more changes there will be. It was like a person's experience of growth. People would mature because they had seen more things, and they would also develop different personalities because of different environments. Everyone's memories were based on their own environment. When Dana read the memories, it was equivalent to experiencing such an environment. It was inevitable that there would be some changes to one's personality, and something would be added to it. What if she saw the memory of a mental illness? Would she also become mentally ill? Or would she become neurotic? However, Dean naturally would not let himself become mentally ill. But he could try to make his thoughts as complex and weird as a mental illness. He could conceive all kinds of strange ideas. When Dana read his memory, these ideas would also flow into her mind and collide with her own worldview. Thinking of this, Dean gradually became excited. This was a divine counterattack. He began to think hard about the specific implementation process and many strange ideas that would impact Dana's mind. Time passed unknowingly and the sky was dark. When a servant came to inform Dean that it was time for dinner, Dean woke up and found that the sky was dark. He had been sitting here for the whole afternoon. He patted the dust on his trousers and followed the guard back to the hall. His dinner was left on the table. Dana was sitting in the seat of honor, eating a Chinese special dinner. Dean saw this familiar meal that he hadn't eaten for a long time. He suddenly felt nostalgic and came to the table to sit down. "You're an adult. Do you still need someone to order you to eat?" Dana glanced at him after he sat down. This glance seemed to have a deep meaning, as if she could see through everything. Dean's heart shivered, but on the surface he looked as usual. He lightly replied, "I'm not afraid to disturb your work." Then he lowered his head to eat. Dana didn't say anything more. After finishing her own meal, she stretched and said, "Chinese food is really good. It's much more delicious than the ones I used to eat. At least it's richer," Dean casually said. Dana got up and left after finishing her meal. Dean looked at her back, and the excitement in his heart suddenly extinguished. He suddenly realized that there was an obvious loophole in his idea. Letting Dana read the memory of a mental illness could indeed change her thinking, but it was only a change. Perhaps this kind of change would make her more violent and crazy. However, his ending would not change because of this. Moreover, he couldn't become a real mental illness, which meant that he would self-destruct first. When Dana read his memory, many of his ideas would be grasped by Dana, including the reasons and purposes of these ideas. She would understand all of them. Therefore, his afternoon of racking his brains was in vain. The excitement in his heart was once again extinguished. He felt that the dinner had become tasteless, as if he was chewing wax. After a very slow dinner, Dean slowly calmed down from his lost and desperate mood. He felt that at least he could try again, or think of other ways. As long as he didn't give up, perhaps there was a way out. After comforting himself, he returned to his room and continued to think while slowly falling asleep. 2 days later, Dean was called by Dana to a separate isolated laboratory in Yangwei Hall. The appearance of this laboratory was not much different from the laboratory in Burroughs' underground base. Dean's heart sank. Dana really inherited Burroughs' idea. Not only did she treat him as an experimental subject, but she also wanted to complete Burroughs' experiment on him. "Don't be nervous. I'm just going to install a small thing for you." Dana looked at the gloomy face of Dean. Her expression was very indifferent. She took a prepared syringe from the hand of a gray-haired old man. Dean looked at the liquid in the syringe. He knew it was anesthetic. He looked numb, didn't speak, and didn't resist. After the anesthetic was injected, Dean felt that his body gradually became numb. He lost consciousness. Dana put him on the bed and locked his hands and feet. "Have a good sleep." Dana took another syringe. The liquid inside was blue. She injected it into Dean's jugular vein. Soon, a wave of drowsiness hit him. Dean struggled to open his eyes, but found that it was extremely difficult. His eyelids seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. He bit the tip of his tongue. Under the stimulation of the faint pain, he was a little sober, but after a few seconds, endless sleepiness hit him again. Dean finally couldn't hold on, and his vision darkened. After an unknown period of time, Dean felt a burst of pain in his brain. He was startled, and his muddled consciousness instantly awakened. Could it be that during the time he was unconscious, his memory was tampered with by her? Soon, his tense muscles relaxed again. He felt that he was still hostile to Dana. Based on this alone, he could be sure that his memory should be intact. The next moment, he felt a slight burning and tearing pain from his neck. He slowly turned his eyes to look. A soft white light shone on his face. Around him, there were several old figures walking back and forth, holding strange materials in their hands. At this time, Dean noticed that many things in the laboratory had little to do with electricity. Dana didn't seem to be experimenting with making insulating clothes. One of the old men saw Dean wake up, and immediately turned and hurried away. After a while, Dana's figure appeared beside the bed. She leaned over and looked at Dean. Her neck exposed her chest. She stretched out her soft white hand and touched Dean's forehead. After a while, she nodded and said, "The fever is gone. Not bad. How do you feel?" Dean thought of what she said before. He slightly opened his mouth, but found that his voice was so hoarse that he couldn't recognize it. What did you install in me?" Dana gently smiled. "It's nothing special. I installed the thing that Blo was going to install for you. If you want to betray me in the future, this thing will immediately take your life." Chapter 985. You! Dean was angry, and then his face was full of despair. Seeing Dean's expression, Dana smiled and turned away. The two gray-haired old men followed her with a smile, fully showing the obedience of assistants. After the people around the bed left, the despair on Dean's face gradually disappeared. His dark eyes were like a bottomless pool. When Dana said that she wanted to install something for him, he had thought of this, so there was no surprise. Moreover, for him, the biggest problem at present was to crack the method of Dana's memory reading and leave her side. If he couldn't do this, even if there was a bomb hidden in his body that could explode at any time, he would not have the mood to care. However, Dana's action made him feel a little relieved, which meant that Dana had no intention of reading his memory for the time being. So he deliberately showed a sad and desperate expression, showing that he had completely given up. However, how was he going to break her memory reading? Thinking of this, Dean was really powerless and desperate. No matter what he thought, when his memory was read, his thoughts would be spied on by Dana, and then cracked. It would be meaningless. It was like a time and space theory without any answer. After thinking hard all night, Dean still had no clue. The next day, Dana came to the laboratory early in the morning. Seeing Dean lying on the bed, she patted his face to wake him up. "Get up, today accompany me to make the electric clothes and the battery." Dean opened his eyes, knowing that she planned to return to Shenluo Empire. Dean didn't resist or ask anything. He got up in a lifeless state. There was no vitality in his eyes. He was like a puppet, a walking corpse. He got up, washed, and finished his breakfast. He followed an old man to the laboratory where Dana was making electric clothes. There were a lot of processed and smelted materials piled up in the laboratory. These materials were produced overnight by all the workshops in the city, and the industrial strength and manpower of the whole city were gathered, so the progress was rapid. In addition to the electric clothes, we also need a set of armor to wear outside to defend against the claws of the Thunderbird. Let them build this. Our task today is to make the electric clothes, the battery, and the electric ball. Dana saw Dean coming, and immediately told him her thoughts and plans. Dean silently listened and said, "Insulating clothes can't be made of aluminum. Although it is a good insulating material, it is easy to melt under high voltage. The same goes for plastic." Dana nodded and said, "I know. The aluminum here has other uses. Let's make the electric suit first. You can be my assistant." Dean nodded slightly. His memory had been read by Dana. Dana knew everything that he knew. Dana also knew everything that he didn't know. Dana knew more than him. So he didn't have anything to show off. He could only be an honest assistant. During the experiment, time flew by without him noticing. 2 days later, 2 sets of insulating clothes were produced. After testing at different voltages, they were finally selected by Dean and Dana. Although the insulation of the 2 insulating clothes couldn't withstand high voltage, but it was the best that could be produced. Moreover, considering the limitations of the insulating material, Dana also installed a conductive device on the electric suit. When the voltage was too high, the electric suit would absorb part of the voltage and store it in the battery connected to the back of the electric suit. There were 8 long batteries at the back of each electric suit. In addition, there were nearly 80 batteries stored in the insulating backpack. When all the batteries in the electric suit were full, they could be replaced. In addition, Dana suddenly had an idea. She made an electric ball and an electrode rod. The electric ball would release electric current after 3 seconds. The electrode rod was 2 short rods. When they collided with each other, it would generate electric current. The principle was very simple. The reason why she made these 2 things was considering that thunderbirds lived in the clouds and fed on lightning. When they encountered a group of thunderbirds, they might be able to use electric current to distract them and buy time for themselves to escape. After everything was ready, Dana was ready to go. She called Dean and Aisha and left the ancient city together. Dean couldn't help but feel some regret when he thought that he would have to return to the Shenluo Empire as soon as he arrived at the eastern continent. He felt that he was like duckweed drifting with the current. What's in it? Dean saw that Dana obviously had an extra backpack and asked curiously. Dana didn't hide and said generously, "It's some legendary flame soul worms from the eastern continent. After we return to Sylvia and find your super chip, we can continue Burrow's experiment. I know a little about this experiment. Don't worry, I'm sure. If I get some useful knowledge from the super chip, I'll be more sure. You'll soon become the first immortal god in this world." The corner of Dean's mouth twitched slightly. Sure enough, his fate had not been changed. He mocked, "Even God has to listen to your orders, doesn't he?" Dana suddenly smiled. It seemed that this sentence had poked the itch in her heart. She was in a good mood. She patted Dean's shoulder and said, "Don't be so depressed. As long as the experiment method is right, I'll also become an immortal god after you become a god. We can create a large number of gods to rule the world. At that time, you'll be my #1 general. I won't treat you badly. I can even give you freedom." Dean's eyes lit up. "Freedom?" Dana laughed more happily. "Yes, freedom." Dean nodded slightly and didn't say anything. But his eyes were no longer in the previous state of lifelessness. Seeing the change in Dean, Dana gently smiled and waved her hand forward. She had the posture of a king. "This world will soon be ours." "I hope so." Dean thought for a moment and looked at her. "Since you can change that person's memory, you should be able to change mine too. Why don't you do it?" Dana slightly pursed her lips and chuckled. "I thought you wouldn't ask. Although it's not difficult for me to change the memory, the impact on the victim is not small. That person's brain nerves should have been damaged a lot. In a short period of time, there won't be any problems. But after a long time, there will be gradual problems such as amnesia, slow reaction, and so on. In serious cases, there will even be dementia." Dean was stunned. He didn't expect that there was such a big risk. No wonder Dana didn't do it to him. She probably didn't want to hurt him, the experimental body. Thinking of this, he smiled slightly in his heart. "When you sneak back, if you encounter a flock of thunderbirds, don't be disobedient." Dana turned her head and looked at him meaningfully. "You don't want her to be buried with you, do you?" Dean knew what she meant. She was worried that if he encountered a flock of thunderbirds, he would hold the idea of dying together with her. "I won't do stupid things," Dean said. "That's good." Dana nodded. Half a day later, under Dana's leadership, they returned to the coast. It was noon and the sun was shining brightly. Dana looked at the sky, turned her head, and suddenly looked at Dean's eyes. "Your magic mark's ability should have recovered, right?" Dean was shocked, and his pores couldn't help but shrink. He instinctively wanted to deny it, but he finally held back the words. Yes, in the past few days when he accompanied Dana to do experiments, he felt that his physical strength was gradually recovering. His vision was getting wider and wider, and his strength was growing rapidly. The power of magic marks had returned to his body, and his whole body was filled with a strong feeling. However, he had been careful to hide it, and tried to perform as normal as possible. He didn't expect that he still couldn't hide it from Dana. Deny? If that was the case, would she be able to read his memory? Chapter 986. After a moment of entanglement, Dean finally chose to admit it. How do you know? Dana's mouth slightly curved. The effect of the anti-magic potion will last for up to half a month. So that's how it is. Dean was secretly glad that he didn't lie. He looked at Dana. What are you going to do? Continue to imprison my magic marks? Don't be nervous. Dana indifferently smiled. I don't need to give you the anti-magic potion with that thing shackling you. On the way back, you will be a burden if you don't have the power of the magic marks. I may not be able to protect you if you encounter a flock of thunderbirds, but don't think about taking this opportunity to escape. Once you cross the war god's wall, the thing in your body will take your life before I see your figure. I don't need to do it myself. Dean knew that she was warning him. He did have such thoughts, but whether her words were true or false, he wouldn't take the risk. After all, life was only once, and if he made a wrong choice, it would be gone. I know. His voice was low, showing a sullen attitude. Dana's eyes flashed, but her face didn't care. In that case, let's get ready to set off. Today's weather is sunny, and it's daytime. Let's fly directly over. Will we encounter the flame birds if we fly over? Dean quickly asked. Dana glanced at him. In such weather, the flame birds will fly above the clouds to enjoy the sunshine. As long as we don't fly too high. Dean knew that she might have considered more than him, so he didn't say anything. Black mucus gushed out of Dana's body, and 4 thin cicada wings protruded from her back. The rest of her organs were still in human shape, but she was in half-demon form. Her body slowly rose. Dean didn't hide anymore. Black mucus also gushed out of his black body, and 2 black wings grew out like 2 huge blades. He didn't lose the magic hunting tool, but like Dana and Burrow, he had the magic hunting tool in his body. He could disintegrate it into the demonic body at any time when needed. Dean had a new understanding of the use of magic marks since the battle with the second Dana. The feeling was even deeper when he saw Burrow's attack. Aside from encountering the flame birds during the migration, Burrow had never entered the full demonic form. Dean even felt that the 12-winged demonic form wasn't necessarily the full form of Burrow's demonic form. After all, the 12-winged demonic form looked almost the same as a human except for the skin color change and the extra wings. This was very different from the other high order's grotesque demonic form. Most of the abyssal demons had a body fusion rate that was close to 100%. Once they were demonized, they would almost be in a monstrous form, and not much of their human form could be seen. During his daily experiments, Burrow would only demonize a portion of his body, sometimes even a single finger. This partial demonization required a lot of skill, and its effects were very obvious. In a protracted battle, it could greatly conserve stamina, and if used well, it could even display a combat strength greater than when he was fully demonized. After these days of observation and understanding, Dean gradually mastered the technique of the demonic form. At this moment, he only demonized the wings of the splitter on his back, but his body was still in a human form. Dana smiled indifferently seeing the changes in Dean. She knew about Dean's observation of the demonic form from the last time she read his memory, but she didn't expect him to complete the observation and implementation in such a short period of time. The people of the old era were really smart. Dean hugged Dana and took off to follow her. Dana flew towards the sea, her body gradually rising. Gradually, she was 300 to 400 meters above the sea, and she continued to rise. Dean followed closely behind. He felt a burning sensation from the sunlight on his body, and the intense radiation was scattered through the clouds of nuclear dust. They flew over the shallow sea all the way forward. The magic marks in Dean's body moved, and circles of light golden halos appeared in his pupils, like the eyes of an insect. It was extremely frightening. In his line of sight, the world had undergone great changes. He could see countless tiny dust particles, and there seemed to be tiny fly-like insects lying on the dust particles, flapping their wings from time to time. However, this scene couldn't be seen by ordinary vision alone. No one would have thought that there would be so many tiny dust particles and tiny flying insects in this seemingly pure and transparent air. If an ordinary person lived in such a place and inhaled a large number of tiny flying insects, it wouldn't take long for their body to collapse, and all kinds of diseases would appear. In Dean's eyes, Dana's body was gradually penetrated. His line of sight penetrated through the armor, and even saw the veins forged by the metal materials inside the armor, and then saw the electric cloak. As his line of sight continued to penetrate, a white body appeared in front of him, but soon, the snow-white body quickly passed by, and entered a deeper picture. The pores were enlarged, and his line of sight became blood-red. He was attracted to the intricate capillaries, deep veins, blood vessels, bones, and so on under the epidermal tissue. Dana's body appeared in Dean's line of sight, like silk being peeled from a cocoon. There were no secrets to study, and he could completely see the structure of her body. This body. Dean's pupils slightly shrank, and a trace of horror flashed in his eyes. If not for his strong control, he would have been scared out of his voice. He suspected that he was looking at a monster. But when he withdrew his line of sight, the figure in front of him was still Dana's graceful figure. His face changed, and his heart was shocked, and at the same time, he felt a bit frightened. As he had expected, there were indeed 3 magic marks in Dana's body. 2 of them were under the 2 plump parts of her chest, and the third one was on the back of her neck, embedded in the top of the cervical spine. It was hidden very deep. The inside of the spine was hollowed out, and a meat sac was padded, and the magic mark was resting in this meat sac. The soft tissues that oozed out of the meat sac were mixed with very fine blood vessels, which were like strands of hair floating out along the gap between the vertebrae, connected with the flesh and blood outside the vertebrae, and absorbed the body's blood circulation. At the same time, it could also transmit the power of the magic mark in the meat sac. It had to be said that this level of experiment was simply a kind of gorgeous art, and it was so exquisite that it made people speechless. He suspected that the third magic mark was planted by Dana herself, and the technique was completely different from the other 2 magic marks. It was more delicate. In addition to the 3 magic marks, the most shocking thing to Dean was the organs in Dana's body. It was too strange. For example, her stomach was not a human's stomach. It looked like a dark purple water sac. However, there were 2 inches of soft tentacles on the surface. They were firmly attached to the flesh and couldn't be shaken. In addition, her intestines were even more terrifying. There was only a very short section of the large intestine, but it was covered with sharp teeth. The small intestine was like a viper, and there were obvious bumps and bumps on the surface. The surface was unusually smooth, and the inside of the intestine was stained with a thick layer of butter. In addition, her skeleton was also very strange. It was not a complete skeleton, but rather a skeleton that was pieced together from different bones. How many experiments has Burrow done on her body? Dean felt that in the dark laboratory, Burrow was repeatedly dissecting the body of a girl, and implanting tissues taken from ugly monsters. That feeling was too crazy. Have you seen enough? Dana's voice suddenly came to him. Dean was surprised, and the circle of pale golden color in his pupils immediately disappeared. He was at a loss. What? Dana tilted her head and looked at him with a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. Isn't your magic mark ability able to see through things? Have you seen my body? She exhaled a breath that smelled like orchids, with a faint feeling of lust. Dean didn't have the slightest interest in her. In fact, even if she stood naked in front of him, it would only make him feel disgusted. At the same time, he had a new understanding of Burrow's ruthlessness. He shook his head. I didn't see. Will we meet Burrow or the other kings if we fly over? Dana's mouth twitched as she saw Dean change the topic. But she already knew the answer, so she was too lazy to pursue it. She casually said, "I deliberately took a detour. We are more than 300 kilometers away from the place we came from. If we meet him, then we can only consider ourselves unlucky. But I have always been a lucky person." Dean smiled slightly. "But I have always been unlucky." Perhaps this time Dean really benefited from Dana's light. They flew over the sea in peace. They didn't encounter flame birds in the sky, nor did they encounter attacks from the sea. After arriving safely, Dean and Dana sighed at the same time. Dana said with a smile, "I said that my luck is good." Dean smiled bitterly. "Let's go." Dana stepped into the forest in front of them and continued to hurry. Dean followed her closely. After walking straight for more than 10 hours, it was already 2 or 3 o'clock at night. The two finally saw the God of War's wall standing between heaven and earth at the end of their vision. The more than 3,000 meters high God of War's wall was like a continuous giant mountain, bringing endless sense of oppression. "Let's rest for the night and set off tomorrow at noon." Dana withdrew her gaze and said to Dean. Dean nodded. If they sneaked in at night and attracted the attention of the Thunderbirds, it was easy to attract the attention of the Imperial Border Guard. It was a little better during the day. The two each chose a big tree in the forest and slept on the tree branches. The surrounding poisonous forest snakes didn't even get close to the two before their bodies automatically broke and fell down. The broken body twisted in pain. "Your perception seems to be good." Dean leaned against the tree, looking at the night sky and talking to Dana. Dana said indifferently, "Haven't you already guessed it? Just as you thought, my first magic mark is Dream Breeder." Dean's face changed slightly. He did associate her memory reading magic mark with Dream Breeder. He didn't expect it to be true. Various information about Dream Breeder suddenly appeared in his mind. However, there was very little description about Dream Breeder in Sylvia's Monster Atlas. It was only known that this thing could pull people into an illusion through poison and make them unknowingly fall into an illusion during battle. From the ability that Dana showed, the ability of Dream Breeder was obviously more than that. This should be the top 5-star legendary monster. Whoosh! Dana's body suddenly moved. She jumped into the grass under the tree and grabbed a monster that looked like a rabbit and a cheetah. This monster had leopard patterns all over its body, but its body was only the size of a rabbit. There were 2 pointed ears on the top of its head, but its sharp teeth were longer, like the teeth of a saber-toothed tiger. Dean turned his head and saw that her fingers had demonized. Her nails turned into black needles and pierced into the forehead of the little monster. After a while, the demonization of Dana's fingers recovered. She threw away the little monster that kept twitching on its legs, and then jumped onto the tree branch where Dean was lying. "What's wrong?" Dean had a bad feeling. "Nothing. Just looking at what you've been thinking during this time," Dana said indifferently. Dean's face changed. He instinctively wanted to raise his hand to resist, but he saw a meaningful light in the depths of Dana's eyes. He suddenly thought of the unknown thing installed in his body and suddenly became silent. Dana's figure flashed. She instantly approached Dean and touched his forehead with her palm. Dean felt his vision turn black. Countless pictures flipped in front of him. This time, the speed was faster than the last time. About a few days later, he opened his eyes, but it was still night. Dana had retreated and stood in front of the branches, looking at him with interest. Dean knew that his thoughts these days had been completely exposed. His face was completely gloomy. But thinking that he was still hostile to Dana, he was a little happy. This meant that his memory had not been modified. "You really are a threat," Dana said with a smile. Dean felt a chill all over his body. He reluctantly smiled and said, "I've given up." "I know." Dana smiled slightly. "However, it's ingenious to think of using mental illness to interfere with my memory reading and even modify my memory. Unfortunately, it's all in vain." Dean showed a wry smile. "Since you've already given up, Then follow me obediently. Dana leaned close to Dean, lifted his chin with her hand, and gently blew out a fragrant breath. She said with a bit of charm and domineering. Dean felt that she was becoming more and more masculine. Sure enough, reading the memory of the cold-looking youth and himself had a certain influence on her. I will. Dean looked straight at her and sincerely said. Dana stared at his eyes and suddenly smiled. She retreated to another tree and said, I won't believe you again. Who knows what else you can think of in your mind? Go to sleep. Maybe there will be a hard battle tomorrow. Dean's mouth slightly moved. He secretly sighed. These days' camouflage had been in vain. He knew why Dana suddenly read his memory. It was not a whim, but because she was worried about an accident during the smuggling. Facing such a cautious enemy, he felt like seeing a beautiful woman with a weak kidney, powerless. He just lay there, looking at the stars through the gaps of the leaf. The stars were bright, and the universe was vast. The stars were always so mysterious and beautiful. Chapter 987. The night always passed quickly. When dawn came, Dean and Dana slowly woke up. They were like buds buried in the darkness of the soil, spreading their bodies to welcome the new day of sunshine. Dana didn't set off immediately after eating barbecued monsters. Instead, she sat on the treetop and waited quietly. When the hour hand of the mechanical watch pointed to it was the time when the sun was at its peak. Dana heated up the remaining monsters for lunch. After filling their stomachs with Dean, they got up and carried their luggage. They looked at the God of War's wall in the distance, and their expressions gradually became serious. Get ready, Dana whispered. Dean nodded slightly, and a pair of magic wings appeared on his back. Whoosh! Dana took the lead and soared into the sky. Dean grabbed Aisha and quickly chased after her like a sharp arrow. The two flew straight up into the sky, and in the blink of an eye, they flew to a height of 3,000 to 4,000 meters. Looking from afar, they could see the dense figures on the God of War's wall. Dana continued to increase her altitude, and in the blink of an eye, she flew to a height of about 6,000 meters. The surroundings were already shrouded in thin clouds. The clouds looked like smoke, but there was a kind of wet feeling. It contained moisture, and there was a kind of cool feeling. Dana continued to fly up into the clouds. The surrounding sea of clouds was like cotton, bulging up. The sky above the clouds was very blue, and the arc was curved. From this point, it was enough to confirm the Earth circle theory. Keep up, full speed, Dana whispered. Her body was like an eagle, flying forward quickly. Dean's eyes were solemn, and he accelerated to keep up. Circles of light golden halos gradually appeared in his eyes, and his field of vision increased sharply. He could see the moisture in the surrounding clouds, as well as countless small strange insects. In less than 10 minutes, Dean saw the towering God of War's wall through the clouds and mist about 3,000 to 4,000 meters below. It was like a giant axe lying across the earth, cutting off all the mountains and rivers. He didn't know if the people on the God of War's wall could detect them. Dean's eyes flashed, but he wasn't too nervous in his heart. Perhaps it was a good thing that they could detect them. At this time, bright red spots suddenly appeared on the upper edge of his field of vision, spreading like a disease on his eyeballs. Dean fixed his eyes and saw a bright red heat source appearing in the clouds above his head. Thunderbird! Dean's heart tightened. Although he had fantasized about encountering a flock of thunderbirds and Dana being killed by them, it was obviously too good of a dream. If they really encountered danger, he might be the first to be sacrificed and take Dana down with him. Charge! Diana said in a low voice. Her speed suddenly increased again, and she drew a snow-white arc through the thin clouds around her, but from the ground it looked like a straight line. Dean's heart sank. He raised his hand to shake the bell and pushed Aisha out. Who? Bright red fire-like wings spread out from Aisha's back. She entered the full demon body state and turned into a dragonoid. She was somewhat similar to the fire dragon race, but they were obviously two different species. Her wings were made of flesh, and there were no flames all over her body. The reddish-brown cuticle covering her body looked extremely thick and tough at first glance. Part of her body was covered with scales, which were completely different from the fire dragon race whose whole body was burning with flames. Only the appearance was similar. After releasing Aisha, Dean immediately sped up and chased after Dana with Aisha at full speed. At this time, he suddenly found that the strength of this Dana was more than twice as strong as the two Danas he had met before. He tried his best to barely keep up with her, but her heartbeat was still stable, and her breath was also very stable. There was no feeling of strain at all. Dean's heart sank. This was not a good thing for him. He felt that this Dana might have the strength of the upper abyss or the Lord of the Abyss. As the two accelerated, the bright red heat source above the clouds in front of them seemed to notice them, and immediately rushed toward them like a whole cloud of fire. 2 minutes later, the bright red heat source appeared in Dean's sight. It was a huge, strange bird with dark purple feathers. There were curved horns on the top of the head, and there were sharp claws under the wings, as if the claws were arms, and the wings were just robes attached to the claws. Charge! Dana's eyes were like lightning, and a black cuticle appeared all over her body. Her body also entered the half-demon state. Her limbs didn't deform, but only the epidermal organs were demonized. Screech! Screech! The ear-piercing bird cries sounded, and the chirping was especially sharp. Dean saw the crackling electric light on these birds with dark purple feathers, and he knew without a doubt that they were thunderbirds. He took a deep breath and imitated Dana. His epidermal body also entered the demonization, and a layer of black carapace appeared. Whoosh! Dana's body drew an arc and she dived down. After flying at full speed for 2 minutes, they had already left the airspace above the battle god wall. Their flying speed was close to 10 kilometers per minute, and they had flown 20 kilometers in 2 minutes. Even if they landed here, given their abilities, they would be able to escape before the scouts, hidden behind the battle god wall, could catch up to them. But screech! The flock of thunderbirds approached in the blink of an eye. Their speed was astonishing, and they were not inferior to Dana. Especially when they dived down from above, all the thunderbirds were jumping with electric light, as if they were being struck by lightning. Boom! A lightning flashed, and it struck Dana in front. The speed of the lightning was so fast that Dana had no time to react. Her body was suddenly shocked, and she almost fell. Dean saw this scene, and his face changed slightly. He quickly let Aisha retract her demonization body, and at the same time, he retracted the wings that extended from the back of the armor, and let his body glide forward and fall. Although the insulating conductive electric cloak inside the armor could protect them, the demonized wings were enough to become the target of electric conduction. This was a problem that they couldn't solve, and they could only rely on luck and the electric ball to support the time of natural fall. Once they reached the ground, they would be safe. But how long would it take to fall from a height of more than 6,000 meters? Dean and Dana had previously calculated that according to the falling speed of an ordinary person, it would take about 50 to 70 seconds if they were in a vertical posture. But their falling speed was obviously faster than this. First, their body density was high and their body was heavy. Second, their backpacks were embedded with lead plates to increase the weight. According to their calculation, it would only take about 20 seconds for them to fall naturally. 20 seconds was very short. But at this moment, for them, it was the distance between life and death. Whoosh! In less than 3 seconds, the Thunderbirds approached again, and the distance was less than 1,000 meters. Hiss! A dazzling, crackling electric light suddenly ejected from the Thunderbirds, hitting Dean and Dana. The electric light flashed, and the sky flashed. Although they were armed to the teeth, and their bodies were tightly wrapped in the electric cloak, they still felt a kind of numb feeling when dozens of lightning bolts hit them, as if there was a weak electric current flowing through their bodies. The electric current exploded on the surface of the armor, pushing the two of them down even faster. Dean didn't care about the increase in falling speed. Through the induction of the experiment in advance, he knew that the 8 batteries on the electric cloak were close to saturation, and this was just the first round of attack. Moreover, not all the Thunderbirds attacked at the same time. A golden halo appeared in Dean's eyes, and the bodies of all the Thunderbirds in his field of vision were penetrated. He could see the blood flow in their bodies, as well as their skeletons. Soon, he saw that there was an electric current flowing in the blood vessels of these Thunderbirds. The electric current was white and as thin as a strand of hair. There was a shocking amount of it. When it gathered on the surface of their bodies, it immediately shot out a bolt of lightning. It was too fast for Dean to dodge, and he couldn't even raise his hand to parry. He was hit again, and the numb feeling in his body became stronger, and he even felt a slight electric shock. The batteries were already saturated. Whoosh! At this time, Dana, who was in front of him, grabbed 2 electric balls from her backpack and threw them to the right. The speed of the electric ball was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it flew a kilometer away, and suddenly burst into a dazzling electric light. The electric light was scorching hot, and it quickly attracted the attention of the Thunderbirds. The Thunderbirds near the electric ball immediately left the formation and flew toward the electric ball. The chaotic electric current ejected from the electric ball hit these approaching Thunderbirds, and they made bursts of cheerful sounds, as if they were bathed in lightning. Soon, one of the Thunderbirds with the larger head and the fastest speed rushed to the electric ball. With a cry, it opened its mouth, picked up the electric ball, and swallowed it. Whoosh! At this time, Dana threw another electric ball to the other side, and soon, many Thunderbirds on the side of the flock rushed over to fight for it. The number of Thunderbirds in this flock was about 1,000. At this moment 100 or 200 scattered, but there was still a dark mass of them, and they continued to chase Dana. When Dana threw the electric ball, she held a few electrode rods in her hand. She threw 2 electrode rods at the same time, and they flew into the flock of Thunderbirds in front of her. The electrode rods crossed each other and collided with each other. Suddenly, there was an electric light that was even more dazzling than the electric ball. The flock of Thunderbirds suddenly became a little chaotic, and they all rushed to fight for it. During this short interval, Dana quickly took out the batteries from her backpack and replaced the batteries on the back of the electric suit. Her hand speed was so fast that it was almost done in a second. This kind of speed was very difficult even for an abyssal. When she threw the electric ball, Dean had already replaced the batteries first, and the 8 batteries that were already saturated were thrown out. Immediately, dozens of Thunderbirds noticed the 8 batteries. They flew over, grabbed them with their beaks, and swallowed them. Dean did not wait for the Thunderbirds to restore their formation again. He took out the electric ball from his backpack and quickly threw it out. Whoosh! Whoosh! One by one, the electric balls were thrown to the left and right, bursting with dazzling electric light. The originally orderly flock of Thunderbirds was now scattered, and they were chasing the electric balls around them. Dean and Dana took turns to throw the electric ball, and attracted more than half of the Thunderbirds away. However, there were still 200 or 300 Thunderbirds staring at them, constantly ejecting lightning. Fortunately, they were barely able to resist the electric strikes of these 200 or 300 Thunderbirds, but they did not have time to replace the batteries. Dean felt a numb feeling in his body again. He gritted his teeth, took out 3 electric balls, and fiercely threw them at the Thunderbirds in front of him. The electric balls exploded, and 3 electric lights flashed. The flock of Thunderbirds suddenly slowed down as if they had hit a wall, and they pounced on the 3 electric balls. The surrounding Thunderbirds also rushed over, but soon, the 3 electric balls were swallowed by the 3 fastest Thunderbirds. When the electric balls disappeared, the flock of Thunderbirds pounced on them again. Dean had already replaced the 3rd battery, and threw out the replacement batteries. As soon as the batteries flew out, they were snatched by the Thunderbirds. Dean saw that they seemed to have experience in snatching, and their speed was getting faster and faster. The electric balls that were thrown out did not fly far, and were snatched by the Thunderbird. Even before the electric balls burst out, they had already been swallowed by the Thunderbird. Lightning exploded on the Thunderbird's necks, but it did not cause the slightest damage to them. Dean hurriedly glanced at the ground, and his heart sank. The objects on the ground were about the same size as he saw from the War God's wall. After so long, there was still a height of 2,000 or 3,000 meters, which meant that they still had to hold on for another 10 seconds. But more than half of the electric balls and electrode rods in his backpack had been consumed. Moreover, in the process of chasing the electric balls, the Thunderbirds were getting closer and closer to them, almost surrounding them. The electric balls could no longer be thrown far away, and the pulling effect was greatly reduced. Screech! A Thunderbird flew over with a strange cry, and opened its sharp claws, trying to pinch Dean. Dean's eyes flashed coldly, and his hand that was wrapped in steel gloves fiercely smashed out. Bang! His fist hit the Thunderbird's sharp claws. The Thunderbird's sharp claws were broken, and its body flew obliquely to open the distance. At this time, the Thunderbirds were getting closer and closer, and from time to time, there were electric balls shooting over. Dean saw a Thunderbird pounce on Aisha and quickly whistled. Aisha, who was falling vertically, suddenly reached out and grabbed the flying Thunderbird. She opened her mouth and bit on its sharp blade, tearing off a piece of flesh. The Thunderbird screamed in horror and quickly beat its body in pain. Its whole body exploded with a strong electric light. Dean's face changed. Although Aisha's electric suit was somewhat different from theirs, and the electricity was not stored in a battery, but a big electric ball in the backpack. However, the saturation of the big electric ball was also limited, and at most, it was equivalent to 3 sets of batteries. Once it was saturated, it could not be replaced again. This was also the reason why he and Dana did not choose to use the big electric ball. Although it was risky and troublesome to replace the batteries, they were equipped with 6 sets of batteries, which were equivalent to the storage of 2 big electric balls. The big electric ball storage suit was specially made by Dana for Aisha. After all, there was no such thing as replacing the batteries in her order. After the previous continuous electric shocks, the big electric ball in Aisha's backpack should be close to saturation, or even full. While Dean was nervous, Aisha's fierce power did not diminish. Shrouded in the electric light, she constantly gnawed the Thunderbird's claws. Dean quickly blew the command to stop the attack. Aisha let go, and the Thunderbird broke away from her hand and hurriedly flew away. Chapter 988. The electric shock is ineffective? Dean's eyes moved. Aisha, who had been violently electrocuted by the Thunderbird, was only slightly injured. She seemed to have a unique resistance to lightning. Maybe this was an opportunity? Escape. Dean immediately thought of this, but he quickly extinguished it. Dana also had the command to control Aisha. However, Aisha's special lightning resistance could at least ease the pressure on him a lot. He immediately whistled and issued the command. Whoosh! The demonized wings on Aisha's back rose, and her whole body demonized into a dragon man. Dean grabbed her demonized dragon tail, and with a whoosh, Aisha's body flew down vertically like an arrow. They were approaching the ground rapidly. Whoosh! Some Thunderbirds noticed Dean and Aisha retreating quickly, and immediately swooped down. But at this moment Aisha was also flying at full speed and was not caught up. Lightning bounced from the Thunderbirds and hit Dean's body, passing through the surface of the armor to Aisha's body. But her body didn't change at all, not even a moment of stiffness or pause. Dean turned his head and saw that Dana's body was still falling vertically, but the speed was obviously very slow. In the blink of an eye, he had pulled away from her. The Thunderbirds that couldn't catch up with Dean immediately turned back and pounced on Dana. Soon, Dana was surrounded by Thunderbirds. At this time, Dean, driven by Aisha, was close to the ground, only about a kilometer away. Seeing that the Thunderbird didn't keep up, he also used his magic wings to cut off the wind created by Aisha and quickly landed. After landing, Dean looked up. Dana was still about 2 kilometers high, and she was falling rapidly, but she was surrounded by layers of thunderbirds. Lightning flashed, and there seemed to be a group of thunderclouds surging in the air. Surrounded by thunderbirds, Dana's figure was no longer visible. Only blazing lightning could be seen bursting from time to time, causing a small commotion. Dean stared closely, secretly praying in his heart, praying for the thunderbirds. Although this was a rare opportunity, he still didn't intend to leave. First, his body was implanted by Dana with an unknown object. Although he couldn't feel what it was, it didn't seem that Dana deliberately blackmailed him from the various laboratory instruments. Second, although Dana was in danger at this moment, he always felt that she still had a hidden card. Whoosh! The thunderbirds gradually tightened their encirclement, and the bursting lightning was also suppressed. Dean felt his scalp tingle. Even if the king came, he would probably be badly battered. At this moment, the flock of thunderbirds that had gradually gathered into a formation suddenly slowed down. Whoosh! A figure suddenly knocked away a thunderbird and sprinted toward the ground. Her whole body was burning with raging flames. It was Dana. At this moment, her entire body was bathed in flames like a fire dragon. In the blink of an eye, she shook off the flock of thunderbirds and rushed to the ground. Go! With a stomp of her foot, the terrifying impact caused the ground to crack. Her body was like a refraction of light as she shot forward rapidly. The flowers, grasses, and giant trees along the way were all set ablaze. Dean was startled for a moment and quickly chased after them with Aisha. Screech! There was a sharp cry from the flock of thunderbirds above their heads. They quickly swooped down and shot lightning bolts down. Dean's head had been demonic, like a monster's head growing on his neck. His field of vision had expanded to 360 degrees. With the help of X-ray and dynamic vision, he carefully observed the flock of thunderbirds. When he saw the white electric filaments swimming in their bodies gradually accumulating on the surface of their bodies, he knew that they were about to eject lightning bolts, so he quickly moved his body. Bang! Bang! Bolts of lightning struck the ground or giant trees. Some trees with a girth of 10 people were split on the spot by the lightning bolts, and the lightning fire burned wantonly. After running for a while, a waterfall appeared on the ground in front of them. The ground seemed to be torn, revealing a deep ravine. The water of the waterfall fell vertically, and white waves surged. Dana took the lead and jumped into the ravine. Dean followed closely behind. Screech! The flock of thunderbirds above their heads let out shrill screeches, but their bodies slowed down slowly. They stopped above the waterfall and kept circling. Dana plunged into the pool at the bottom of the waterfall. Her fire dragon demonic body quickly converged and turned into a sea monster demonic body. Fine silver scales grew on her body, and she swam quickly in the water. Soon, blood appeared in the water. Under the surge of the waterfall, the blood became more and more, dyeing the pool red. When Dean rushed into the water, he saw a huge body like a mosasaurus in the water. There was a huge wound on its chest. Obviously, it was Dana's masterpiece. Dana swam to the front of the pool, where there was a stone crack. Dean let Aisha converge her demonic body, and the two followed all the way. After passing through the narrow stone crevice, the three of them soon arrived at a relatively large lake. Immediately, strange fish the length of an arm rushed over. The fish's mouth, which was originally the size of a fist, suddenly opened, revealing a mouth full of sharp teeth, big enough to swallow a human head. Dean's demonic splitting blade quickly cut off the fish. Using X-ray vision, he saw that it was a lake, and there were more strange fish in the distance. In addition, there were several deep shadows of behemoths. He immediately rushed upwards, and with a whoosh, he leapt from the surface of the lake. Dana also jumped out of the water at the same time. Her demonic body once again changed into a fire dragon demonic body, and she flew towards the lake. Screech! The Thunderbird's cry came from above, but it was obviously a lot farther away. Dean flew to the shore with Aisha. He looked up and saw that the Thunderbird was still hovering over the waterfall behind them. It seemed that it didn't notice that they had escaped here. Dana landed on the shore. Her demonic body converged, and her wet hair draped over her shoulders. She wiped the water stains from her hair and slightly gasped. She turned to look at Dean, who landed beside her, and chuckled. "Why didn't you take the opportunity to escape?" "I couldn't bear to leave you," Dean indifferently said. Dana covered her mouth and chuckled. "You're good at talking." Dean shrugged his shoulders and glanced around. He saw that Dana's armor and electric cloak were gone. There was no armor that could adapt to switching between 3 different demonic bodies. The close-fitting electric cloak was even more so. There was only a vertical opening for wings on the back. The electric cloak would be torn once the demonic body was fully transformed. Without armor or lightning suit, Dana was only wearing a thin cloth undergarment. It was wet and stuck to her body, making her petite but voluptuous figure look extremely alluring. "Do I look good?" Dana looked at him and asked. Dean also looked at her naturally, without the slightest shyness. "Yes." "Compared to her?" Dana glanced at Aisha, who was silent next to her. Dean smiled. "You have seen my memory. What do you think?" Dana slightly curled her lips. Boring. She no longer paid attention to Dean. She lowered her head to tidy up her clothes and took off the backpack behind her. This backpack was not made of ordinary cloth, but a buckle of alloy iron. It was similar to the strap of a mechanical watch. There was a gypsum insulation layer inside. It was safe under the fire dragon's body. Dana took out the clothes from the backpack and glanced at Dean. "Turn around." Dean quickly turned around and said, "Let's wait for the Thunderbirds to retreat, then we'll continue our journey. If we attract their attention and they chase us, there's nothing that can stop them." "Of course." Dana's voice came. Dean tore off his broken electric suit and armor. He didn't bring extra clothes to replace them, so he could only wrap the cloth together and tie it around his waist. It was like a primitive panty skirt. "I didn't expect the undeads to have a good resistance to lightning. I didn't notice it before. Is it because of the lack of water in their body? Let's go back and study it." Dana's voice came from behind. Dean's mouth slightly moved. He knew that she had noticed that he let Aisha rush to the ground first. He was silent for a moment and said, "Are you hungry? I'm going to catch some fish to eat." Dana rolled her eyes at him. "Go." Dudian immediately got up and went to the lake to catch fish. Soon he caught a few big fish that were half the length of a human. These fish were full of sharp teeth and looked hideous. Some of them had green blood flowing out of their bodies. It was highly toxic. Dean picked 2 edible fish monsters, skinned and beheaded them. He picked a few pieces of the most succulent meat and cut them off. He found some dry firewood and set up a bonfire to barbecue. While Dean was busy with the food, Dana walked around the lake. She found that the lake was surrounded by mountains. The lake was not large, like a vertical collapsed basin. There was a small forest behind the shore. She could see the end of the forest at a glance. The water from the waterfall flows into the lake. The water in the lake should flow somewhere else. There must be a secret passage underground. Dana sat back by the bonfire and smelled the aroma of the fish. She smiled. "If these Thunderbirds don't leave by tonight, we will leave from the bottom of the lake." Dean nodded. He had no right to speak, so he could only agree. Soon, the fish was roasted. Dean handed her a portion and picked up the other 2 portions. His fingers turned into magic cutting blade. He cut the fish into thin slices and fed it to Aisha. Undead eating cooked food. Gee. Dana laughed. It seemed like she was ridiculing and sighing. Dean indifferently said, "Haven't you seen my memory? She has been eating cooked food for a long time." "You can be quite stupid sometimes." Dana sighed. With your brain, if you are cruel enough to feed all of Sylvia's life to her, perhaps she would have the strength of a king. After all, she is a witcher who has turned into a zombie king. There is a big difference between her and an ordinary zombie king. In addition to the evolution of flesh and blood, her body will continue to awaken naturally. In the future, she will become a king or even surpass a king. That's an exaggeration. Dean glanced at her. Even if she eats all of Sylvia's life, at most she will evolve faster. Moreover, she has already awakened 7 times. She has reached the limit of awakening. Who told you that 7 times of awakening is the limit? Dana looked at him mockingly. Dean was startled. The records of the Dragon Clan are limited. In a way, 7 times of awakening is indeed the limit. But that is the limit of a human. But for undead, there is no limit. Dana indifferently said. The reason why awakening is divided into 1 to 7 times is that the monster genes implanted in the body of the Witcher will be completely awakened and completely integrated with the cells of the body. This is the limit of awakening. However, there is also super awakening above this. Dana chuckled. However, the super awakening is a bit troublesome. The proportion of monster genes is too high. It is easy to affect the thinking. Generally, the super awakening will have a big change in temperament. They will even think that they are a monster, not a human. Dean was stunned. He didn't expect such a change. Moreover, the super awakening is not the limit. Dana's words surprised Dean again. The super awakening is just a change from a human to a monster. But for the undead, when the body is super awakened, the monster genes are the majority. But it is meaningless because they have no thinking. After the super awakening, the monster genes in their body will continue to divide and mutate. Under the interference of the virus, it will mutate endlessly. In the end, no one knows what they will become because there is no end. Dana looked at the stunned Dean and said, although she will naturally awaken, but the speed of natural awakening is very slow. Of course, compared to when she was still a human, it can be said that it is very fast. But after the super awakening, it will slow down. At this time, if there is a large amount of flesh and blood, it will accelerate the body evolution and cell division, and speed up the awakening. So, if you are willing, she has already become a king, or even a king can't match her existence. You can call her the God of Corpses. God of Corpses. Dean was stunned. Dana finished the fish in her hand and licked the little oil stains on her white, tender fingers. She looked at Dean with interest. What? Are you regretting? Dean recovered and sighed. A little bit. If you knew this earlier, maybe you would really kill the whole Sylvia's life, and even kill everywhere to help her awaken. In this case, she will be your strongest power. Dana said indifferently. Then you will rely on her help to seize the ruling power of the Empire. You will have enough time to slowly study how to restore her. You won't have to hide or even fall into a desperate situation like now, right? Dean was shocked. He had thought about it just now. Dana said his thoughts almost word for word. It seemed that she knew him better than himself. But this is also good. Dean quickly calmed down and said, a king's help indeed makes me excited for a moment. But even if I knew this earlier, I wouldn't do it. I know you won't, Dana said indifferently. You are worried that the higher her body awakens, the more mutations there will be, and the more difficult it will be to restore, right? Dean smiled bitterly. Do you have mind-reading skills? Of course, I should be the person in this world who knows you the best. Dana blinked and said, is it fun to seduce me in front of her? Dean asked. Dana curled her lips. Boring. Chapter 989. The flock of thunderbirds hovered above the waterfall and didn't disperse for a long time. Dean and Dana sat by the woods to rest. Half an hour later, Dana suddenly opened her eyes and looked up at the hovering thunderbird. She frowned and seemed to think of something. She suddenly stood up and whispered, prepare to retreat. Dean saw that she had already guessed it and felt a little regretful. He opened his eyes and asked, "What's wrong?" Thunderbirds are specially trained air forces of the Empire. They are smart and intelligent. They have been hovering here for a long time. It should be a signal to the border guards on the God of War wall. We have to leave quickly. Dana's face was gloomy. She quickly packed up the luggage on the ground and kicked the bonfire into the lake to erase the traces on the ground. "Let's go." Dana was about to enter the water when her face suddenly changed. Bang! 7 or 8 figures jumped out from the surrounding stone walls and quickly surrounded Dean and Dana. Hidden sentries. Dana frowned slightly when she saw the dark military uniforms of these people. She glanced at other places and didn't know if there were more people hiding in the dark. Dean didn't expect that the hidden sentries behind the God of War wall had already lurked here. He was surprised. He looked at them with thermal vision and found that there were no heat fluctuations emitting from their bodies. They were like dead people. Moreover, there was a smell of soil on their bodies. It was no wonder that he and Dana didn't notice them. However, these people didn't make a move. They were either waiting for them to be alone and expose their flaws, or they didn't have the confidence to deal with 3 abyss-level masters. "Stop," one of the burly men said in a low voice. Like the others, he wore a black mask and only revealed a pair of shining eyes. "What's wrong?" Dana looked at him calmly with a trace of innocence on her face. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The burly man said in a low voice. "Is it forbidden to enter here? Didn't you see the notice?" Dana's mouth curved into a smile. Dean couldn't help but sigh in his heart as he saw the dialogue between the two. It seemed to be a simple and normal question, but in fact it exposed the purpose of both sides. The problem exposed by the hidden sentry was undoubtedly fatal. Originally, they weren't sure if there were any experts lying in ambush in the surroundings, waiting for an opportunity to launch a sneak attack while they were fighting. However, the hidden sentry's words seemed normal, but in fact they were deliberately stalling for time. After all, no matter what their purpose was, it wasn't something that could be clarified with just a few words here and there. The best way was to capture them and interrogate them. And the best way to arrest them was to attack them with full force as soon as they appeared, exerting both psychological and physical pressure on them. The reason why Dana spoke was also a test. Through the second sentence of the hidden sentry, she had already gotten the answer she wanted. When Dean secretly sighed, the burly man coldly said, "You are also an abyss walker. Don't you have a map? Not far ahead is the Battle God Wall, and everything within 100 miles of the Battle God Wall is a forbidden land." "Is that so? How come I don't know?" Dana was surprised, but there was a hidden smile in her eyes. The burly man was about to speak, but suddenly a black shadow attacked him. Dana instantly cut into the demonic body, and as fast as an afterimage, she suddenly approached the burly man. So fast! The pupils of the burly man shrank. Although he was already prepared, he didn't expect that Dana would suddenly attack. Moreover, her speed was faster than his reaction. In a hurry, he instinctively raised his hand to block with a dagger. Clang! The dagger was hit and the shock numbed his hand. At the same time, a sharp pain suddenly spread from his chest, and then he felt a cold wind blowing past. He looked down and saw that his chest had been pierced by a dark and sharp spear. It wasn't a spear, but a pointed leg. Puff! The sharp leg was pulled out, and the black shadow suddenly retreated, avoiding the 2 sharp swords that stabbed from the back of the burly man. In this gap, one of the masked sentries quickly hugged the burly man who was slowly falling down. Although the face could not be seen clearly, judging from the figure, it was obviously a slender woman. There was a trace of grief in her eyes, and tears welled up. However, she did not hug the burly man and call out to him. Her emotions were out of control. She just gritted her teeth and said one word: "Kill!" The other 6 sentries moved at the same time. At the same time they stepped out, they all activated their demonic bodies. In the blink of an eye, the 6 of them turned into 6 monsters. Some of them were half human and half snake, some looked like a mole, and their bodies were covered with sharp black fur. Some of them had oval pink wings and antennae on their foreheads that fluttered sweet pollen. Dominator, Dominator. Dean's eyes swept around. When the sentries stimulated their demonic bodies, he saw that they were dominators. His heart was a little relieved. He didn't turn around when the 3 sentries behind him rushed over, but he knew the situation behind him. From the back of his spine, he suddenly demonized 3 blades and threw them out. Puff! The 3 sentries saw that Dean didn't look back, and thought that he didn't react. However, the blades that suddenly shot out made the 3 people turn pale. The speed of the blades was so fast that it was faster than Dean's running speed. The 3 quickly stopped, but it was too late. They could only raise their enchanted weapons to resist. In the blink of an eye, 2 of them were cut at the waist, and their enchanted weapons were cut off. It was like a sharp knife cutting tofu. There was no sense of pause. The remaining sentries suddenly felt uneasy when he raised his enchanted weapon to resist. He rolled on the ground and dodged. Then he saw the bodies of his 2 companions fall to the ground. He couldn't help but turn pale. Whoosh! The 3 blade-like limbs swung to the left and quickly turned back to stab at the surviving sentries. The sentries hurriedly turned and ran. The speed of the explosion was beyond Dean's expectation. Unexpectedly, he was at the abyssal walker level. Even the heat fluctuations in his body had reached the abyssal level. However, it was just the lower abyssal level. Puff! The 3 blades quickly caught up and stabbed into the sentry's back. With a light pull, the body of the sentries was broken into several pieces and fell to the ground. Unexpectedly, there are 3 abyssal walkers. Their ability to control the heat source is simply top-notch. Dean secretly sighed in his heart. It was easy to expose one's smell and physical state when one entered the demonization state. Although the 3 sentinels had leaked some heat, they still restrained themselves. He was ashamed of his inferiority in control. He estimated that he would need to hone the dragon blood technique for another year and a half. Dana's battle was also over when he dealt with the 3 sentries. Let's go. Dana shook off the slender sentries. The latter's chest was pierced through, and her death was the same as the burly man. Her throat was also crushed, and there was an obvious small hole on her forehead. Dean saw that Dana had read her memory. Splash! Dana quickly jumped into the water without the slightest pause. Dean held Aisha's arm and followed her. As soon as they fell asleep, Dana's demonic body turned into the shape of a sea monster. This time Dean saw it clearly. It turned into a strange fish that was 5 or 6 meters long. It looked like a shark, but there were 6 or 7 sharp blades on both sides of its body. When it swam quickly, these sharp blades were sharp weapons that could easily cut the body of other fish. Moreover, under the abdomen, there was a strange mouth full of sharp teeth. The eyes of this strange fish vaguely looked like Dana's. Its face was elongated and protruded, which looked very strange. Whoosh! Dana opened its mouth and swallowed Dean and Dana. Dean felt his body was tightly wrapped again, just like when he was swallowed when he went to the sea of the East Continent. However, this time, he was no longer blind. In her mouth! Dean's heart was pounding. This time his demonic body was not suppressed, and he was in Dana's mouth. What a good opportunity this was! His pores slightly shrank. He was very nervous. His mind was calculating all kinds of scenes after he made a move. After entering the demonic body, all the sharp blades on his body would attack at the same time and tear and pierce Dana's body from the inside out. For him, this process only needed a little more than a second. The extra second was the speed of his attack, and that second was the speed of entering the demonic body. It was also this second that was incomparably critical. If he had entered the demonic body at this moment, he would not hesitate to make a move. He didn't believe that Dana could react in time. However, That 1 second of demonic body was enough for Dana to feel it, and then instantly spit him out. He hesitated and tangled in his heart. Until more than 10 minutes later, he suddenly felt his body being squeezed out. He opened his eyes and saw light. He came to a shallow river, surrounded by green banks and forests. Phew! He felt inexplicably relieved, feeling both regretful and fortunate. What happened just now might have been a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it might also have been destined to fail. After all, Dana knew about his demonic body and his unwillingness to give up, but she still dared to put him in her mouth, which was enough to show that she was fully confident and prepared. Maybe not. Maybe she knew that I was paranoid and wouldn't make a move? Such a thought emerged in Dean's heart. His eyes slightly flashed, and he finally smiled bitterly. He was indeed too paranoid. However, he felt that the possibility of this was very low. No one dared to put their life in the hands of others. A paranoid person might have a moment of decisiveness. Hurry up. Let's go. Dana jumped to the shore and quickly transformed into the demonic body. She spread her wings and flew away. Dean picked up Aisha and used his magic split wing to chase after them. Dean asked as they caught up, "Are there any masters in ambush around?" "Yes." "What did you read from the mind of that sentry?" "This is not something you should ask." Dana glanced at him. Dean shrugged slightly. The two flew all the way forward. They passed through mountains and rivers along the way. The ground quickly retreated under their feet. After flying for 4 or 5 hours, they encountered several flying strange birds along the way. Dana easily beheaded them. Finally, they came to a dark forest to rest. "At this speed, it won't take us a few days to return to Sylvia." Dean sighed. It would take him a week to travel this distance. But now it only took him a few hours. No wonder he was called Abyss Walker. As long as he didn't run into the depths of the Devil's Pit, he wouldn't encounter much danger. Dana leaned against the tree and closed her eyes to rest, prepare dinner. Dean sighed as he got up to look for monsters. Soon he came back with 2 furry tiger-sized monsters. He threw them on the ground and picked up the bonfire to peel and barbecue them. He handed one of the thighs to Dana and then took the other one and fed it to Aisha. He waited for Aisha to finish eating before he started to enjoy himself. Dean buried the extra corpses on the spot. He intended to extinguish the bonfire. After all, they didn't need to keep warm with their physique. But Dana stopped him. "It's comfortable to sit by the fire," Dana said lightly. Dean could only give up. He went to find more firewood. The sky gradually darkened and the night came. Dean and Dana rested against the tree. From time to time, monsters were attracted by the flames. Dana treated Dean as a guard and let him deal with them in advance. In the blink of an eye, the night passed. More than a dozen monsters' corpses of different sizes were lying around the place where they rested. Dana stretched and got up to greet Dean to continue their journey. 4 days passed in the blink of an eye. 2 figures flew over a forest and stopped. "Is this the Forest of Despair?" Dana looked at the vast forest. Although she had seen it in Dean's memory, but Dean's memory was from his own point of view. The area he could see was limited, but this time it was a panoramic view. "Do you know what monster is under this forest?" Dean's heart was moved as he heard her words. He remembered the giant tentacles under the soil when he passed through the forest. If the whole forest was alive, then what kind of monster would it be? "It should be a domain monster," Dana said and flew forward at the same time. Domain monster? It was the first time for Dean to hear such a thing. "I've heard Biolello talk about this kind of monster before. This kind of monster is huge and can be regarded as a living thing. The range of their body is their domain. Even the king will be in danger if they step into it," Dana said casually. "However, they generally won't take the initiative to attack. They have their own hunting habit. Like this forest, as long as you don't step into it, it should be fine." Dean nodded slightly. Unexpectedly, at this moment, Dana had just finished speaking when two black tentacles with a diameter of 4 to 5 meters suddenly shot out from the forest, slapping toward the two of them. Dana's face changed. She quickly said, "Fly higher." Dean didn't need her to tell him to fly higher to avoid the black tentacles. "Since I can deal with the king, if I rush down, she won't dare to follow me. But in this case, although I'm out of her control, I'm also in danger. Moreover, I don't know what she has installed in me." Dean's eyes flashed and finally sighed. He was disappointed with himself. He was too powerless. The forest returned to silence after the two flew to an altitude of thousands of meters. Dana was relieved, but her face didn't look good. She snorted. "When our experiment is successful, we will burn this thing." Dean was silent. Chapter 990. I'm back. Dean looked at the red wasteland under his feet. He could clearly see the traces of reclamation left by Sylvia's warriors in the past. His mood was complicated. When he left the red wasteland, he was still a dominator, but he already had control over Sylvia. Now that he was back in the abyss, he couldn't even control his own life and death. Bang! Bang! A giant beast about 2 stories tall jumped out of the ground. It was covered in black iron armor like a rhinoceros, and its momentum was terrifying. Dean saw that it was a level 83 bone-eating rhinoceros. Its combat power was comparable to an inner wilderness master, but its body was clumsy and its shortcomings were obvious. It was easy to target. However, its skin was rough and its flesh thick. Inner wilderness warriors who didn't have a bit of courage generally wouldn't dare to hunt it alone. Dean soon saw 4 heat sources chasing after the bone-eating rhino. However, there was a clear gap between their speed and that of the bone-eating rhino. Once the bone-eating rhino started to run, only an expert who was extremely good at speed from the inner wilderness would be able to catch up. Otherwise, only an expert who had reached the sovereign level would be able to catch up. Dean saw the 4 heat sources. His heart skipped a beat and he suddenly descended. Whoosh! He stopped 3 meters above the ground. Looking at the rapidly approaching bone-eating rhinoceros, he felt like he was being hit by a train. He took a deep breath and raised his hand. Roar! The bone-eating rhinoceros didn't slow down when it saw someone blocking its way. Instead, it roared and accelerated. The next moment, its head hit Dean's raised palm. Whoosh! Dean's body was pushed back by more than 20 or 30 meters before gradually coming to a stop. The bone-eating rhinoceros's hooves rubbed against the ground, creating 2 deep grooves. Roar! The bone-eating rhinoceros roared angrily. It stomped its hooves, ready to charge again. Dean smiled. Suddenly, 2 demonic blades shot out from under his armpits. Whoosh! The blades pierced the rhinoceros's face as if he was cutting tofu. The rhinoceros screamed, but it soon stopped. Its 2-story-tall body swayed slightly and fell to the ground with a loud crash. Bang! Dust flew up from the ground. Dean let go of his hand and the demonic blades retracted. The bone-eating rhinoceros's skin was extremely hard, but it was still defenseless in front of the splitting blades. Whoosh! The 4 heat sources quickly caught up, and their figures also appeared in Dean's line of sight. Dean squinted his eyes and saw the armor and the engravings on the pauldrons. They were from the Dragon Clan. At this time, the 4 people seemed to have noticed Dean and the fallen rhinoceros. They slowed down and stopped. They looked at each other and whispered to each other for a moment. After a while, one of them flew out and slowly approached Dean. The man was shocked when he saw Dudian's appearance. You are the rebel warlord? Dean faintly looked at him. You know me? This should be the depths of the Red Wasteland, right? Aren't you just stationed near the defensive line? Why are you chasing after this monster? The man was startled for a moment but quickly reacted. He quickly changed his expression and said in a humble and respectful manner, Greetings, warlord. I heard that you have gone out. You may not know this, but our defensive line has been moved to the depths of the Red Wasteland. The outer wasteland has been cleaned up and turned into a hunting area. We have been ordered to clean up the depths of the red wasteland and turn it into an outer wasteland. Dean's eyes slightly moved. Orders? Whose orders? Aoli's face slightly changed. He was about to open his mouth when a figure suddenly fell from the sky and appeared in front of him. It was Dana. Come here. Dana looked indifferent as she raised her slender hand. Aoli was startled as he noticed the petite and beautiful girl. He quickly realized that she should be Dean's female companion. He didn't dare to disobey the order. Yes. As he flew closer, Dana's palm quickly pinched his face. One of her fingers turned into a black spike and shot into his forehead. Aoli was about to struggle, but his eyes became dull and lifeless. After a few minutes, he slowly recovered, but his eyes were blank. So that's how it is. Dana thoughtfully raised her altitude and said to Dean, "Let's go." Dean slightly wryly smiled. Reading memories was good. It was reliable and fast. Whoosh. Dana's figure was like the wind as she flew forward. Dean quickly arrived in front of the three people in the distance. But Dana didn't slow down. She completely ignored the three people and flew straight towards them. The three people had sent Aoli to inquire about the situation. They were ready to escape when they saw Dana and Dean rushing towards them. But it seemed that the other party didn't care about them at all. They turned around and saw that Dean and Dana's figures had turned into black spots and were about to disappear from their sight. After a moment, Aoli returned in front of the three people. "Who was that?" the three people quickly asked. Aoli smiled. "You may not believe it, but it's the rebellious wall lord of the outer wall. I didn't expect that I would bow down to a pariah one day." "It's him?" The three people were surprised. They had heard of Dean's legendary deeds. He was a pariah who climbed to the highest position in the inner wall. He was superior to many nobles and tycoons. Even the ancient hunter families had to look up to him. "I heard that he left the giant wall and went to the kingdom of God with the strength of a sovereign level. How could he come back so soon? Doesn't it take years to go back and forth to the kingdom of God? His speed is so fast. He shouldn't be a sovereign-level expert, right?" The three people looked at each other. They could see the shock in each other's eyes. If he wasn't a sovereign, then he must be an abyss expert. Just now, the person he was hugging seemed to be our former saint, Her Highness Aisha? One of them asked in puzzlement. "It's her. I used the eagle's eye to see her. But it seems that she was infected and turned into an undead. Her eyeballs were completely black." Another graceful woman sighed. "I don't know what kind of storm will be set off in the giant wall if he comes back at this time. I guess another massacre will begin." Aoli muttered to himself. "What did you see? What's the situation inside the giant wall?" Dean asked Dana. Dana replied, "The Amelia tribe that you met has migrated to the God's Wall. Moreover, they have taken control of the God's Wall." Dean wasn't too surprised. The Amelia tribe had run out of food and ammunition at that time. They had to find a new shelter or they would slowly decline. Although the map he gave them wasn't trusted, but as long as there was a trace of possibility he would try. It would be difficult for the Amelia tribe to resist. After all, the high-end forces within the giant wall had suffered a great loss after the attack of the invaders. They didn't have the same level of fighting strength as the Dragon Mother. "You are lucky." Dana glanced at Dean, who was gradually catching up. "The Wall Lord Aristotle came back not long after you left. Your so-called friends are wanted. I don't know if they are alive or dead. Fortunately, Amelie's tribe has migrated over and avenged you." Dean was startled. "Was he killed?" "I don't know if he is alive or not. There is no news of him being beheaded. He should be captured and imprisoned." Dana smiled. "You don't seem to be worried about your friends." Dean calmly said, "There is nothing to worry about. I have made preparations before I left and told them that life and death are up to fate. Whether they can survive or not depends on their own luck and wisdom." "You are open-minded." Dana slightly curled her lips. I have seen a lot of things. Naturally, I will be open-minded. Dean shrugged. That's not necessarily the case. The more I see, the more I care about it. It's just like how people tend to be misophobic after seeing too many dirty things. After hearing too many ghost stories, people tend to be afraid and become timid, Dana said calmly. Dean didn't refute. Suddenly his mind turned. Ghost stories? Whoosh. It didn't take long for them to leave the red wasteland and come to the outer edge. From time to time they saw monsters running on the ground or gnawing their prey. They also saw teams of pioneers surrounding the monsters. Dean found that the number of pioneers here was obviously more than when he left. Is this the effect of Amelie Tribe's management? What are you going to do after finding the superchip? Take control of the giant wall? Dean asked. Dana indifferently said, It's just a small giant wall. If it's a kingdom of God, I can reluctantly accept it. Dean was speechless. Dana's tone was too big. But I would like to see the spaceship of Amelie Tribe. We can use it as our laboratory, Dana said with a little interest. Dean shrugged his shoulders, indicating that he was at ease. The situation inside the giant wall had been settled as they talked while flying. Not long after, the giant wall of Sylvia slowly appeared in front of the two people's line of sight. The towering giant wall still looked shocking, making people marvel at this magnificent project. They flew over the giant wall and saw soldiers patrolling on the giant wall. Whoosh! A signal flare suddenly ejected into the air. Apparently, the soldiers on the giant wall also saw Dean and Dana. When the two flew to less than 300 meters away from each other, a loud voice came from the giant wall. Stop! Dana didn't slow down but accelerated. The soldiers on the giant wall suddenly changed from alert to defensive formation. More than a dozen soldiers pulled out a bright silver long-barreled gun and aimed at Dana. Whoosh! The bullet was faster than a rifle bullet. It reached 5 times the speed of sound. Dana slightly tilted her head. The bullet passed by her neck. It wasn't a thrill for her, but there was no need to deliberately avoid it. Her figure was like a phantom butterfly. There seemed to be 8 or 9 Danas in the air. They quickly approached the giant wall. The bullets passed like streamers. None of them hit. When Dana got close, the soldiers quickly abandoned their guns and pulled out their swords. Puff! Dana's body was burning with flames. The flames suddenly spread like a ring of fire. The surrounding soldiers were swept by the ring of fire as soon as they entered the demonic body. Their bodies were suddenly cut off. The flesh and blood of the wounds were burned by the flames. Dean flew over and looked at the dead soldiers on the ground. From the carvings on the armor, he could tell that they were from the Wing family. This gun. Dean picked up a gun. He found that the structure of the gun was much better than the simple guns he made in the giant wall. It was better than the old era rifles. Dana continued to fly forward. She didn't care about the dozen people she killed. After entering the giant wall, Dean saw the outer wall area. There was no change. The side wall still firmly blocked the inner wall and the outer wall. It divided status and wealth. Dana's figure flew over the outer wall area and the side wall. The soldiers stationed on the side wall saw the two people passing through the sky. They immediately sent a signal. But they turned a blind eye to it. Soon they sent another signal with a longer curve. After entering the inner wall area, Dana flew to a secluded place in the suburbs. There was a waterfall. There were no villages or towns nearby. It was all plains with few weeds. It wasn't suitable for monsters to hide and hide. Dana flew into the waterfall. It didn't take long for her to return with a small copper box in her hand. Dean's face changed slightly, but he was silent. Dana opened the box and took out a small box. It was similar to a diamond ring box. There was a password on it. After she dialed the password, the small box opened. There was a chip inside. It's a good place to hide it, Dana praised. Dean's mouth slightly moved, but he didn't speak. Let's go and find the palace. Dana smiled. She was in a good mood. Although she knew the location of the storage of the superchip from Dean's memory, it had been so long. Who knew if it was lost or not? Dean silently followed. After a while, the two flew over the Earl cities and came to King City. At this moment, King City was already armed to the teeth. It was daytime, when there was a lot of people, but the city gates were tightly shut. Even the drawbridge had been lifted. Dark shadows swayed in the moat. They were bloodthirsty monsters. "It seems that they are ready to welcome us," Dana said with a smile. Her body was burning with flames. She flew straight to the city gate. Whoosh! Immediately, cannonballs were ejected from the city. Without any shouting, they started the fight directly. Dana looked at the black cannonball flying over. Her eyes flashed. She converged the flame between her palms and stretched out her slender white hand. Facing the fierce cannonball, she gently caught it. At the same time, she rotated her body and drove the cannonball to make an arc. Then she threw it backhand. The cannonball hit the tower and exploded. Dean sighed in his heart when he saw that her soft hand had reached perfection. He followed far behind and didn't make a move. He slowly thought about other things. He didn't have much time. He had to think about it before the next memory was read. Dana didn't plan to let Dean make a move. For her, these attacks were lighter than an itch. She could easily resolve them. She didn't stop flying forward. Along the way, there were cannonballs and pioneers who could fly. Chapter 991. Inside the palace, dozens of figures dressed in strange clothes stood at the bottom of the stairs, each emitting a powerful aura. They looked up at the figure in front of the throne. It was a petite girl, with golden hair like a waterfall, and a pair of beautiful golden eyes. They were like a lake, pure without any impurities, but with a noble aura that could not be looked at directly. This girl stood in front of the throne, and on the throne sat a benevolent-looking old woman. She held a golden scepter in her hand and wore a crown. She was graceful and beautiful. The wall guard just sent a message. There are intruders outside the palace. Everyone who is willing to lead the army. The girl looked around, her eyes calm, her small body without a hint of fear. Reporting to the goddess, "I am willing to go," someone immediately said. As soon as he said this, another tall and strong man said, "Reporting to the goddess, the Western City Guard days has been sacrificed. The enemy is definitely not an ordinary pioneer. It should be a ruler. Let me go." "I will go too. The two of us will have a better chance," another girl in black tights said. She had 2 daggers on her waist, and it was obvious she was good at speed and assassination. "I will go too. I am willing to serve," the others said. Seeing everyone so enthusiastic, the girl nodded slightly. "Everyone, no need to fight. Pooty is right, the enemy is likely to be a ruler. Everyone else, follow me. Pooty, Sengsi, you two lead the army. Try not to injure the civilians." "Yes," the strong man and the girl in black tights said at the same time. The two left quickly. At this time, a servant in golden armor ran over. His body was engraved with strange patterns. He was a desolate guard. He said to the girl, "Reporting to the goddess, the heavenly eye has been activated and locked on to the enemy." "Is that so? Switch the image," the girl ordered. In the sky above the palace, a light screen was projected, floating in mid-air. There was no physical screen, but the light screen showed a clear image. At this moment, 3 figures were flying in mid-air. There were constantly cannonballs being shot, but they were gently held back by a petite girl who looked no more than 17 or 18 years old. She did not break the balance of the cannonballs and turned to throw them at a distant building. Boom! The ground exploded, raising a cloud of dust. Splashing wooden boards appeared at the edge of the image. Although there was no sound, it was not hard to see how tragic the scene was. Whoosh! 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 More than a dozen figures flew over from the ground and transformed into demonic bodies. They turned into half-human, half-demon monsters and roared as they pounced at the girl. The young girl's body suddenly burst into flames, and the flames shot out like finger-long sparks, as fast as light arrows. The warriors who charged forward were instantly pierced through, unable to resist at all. Impossible! You killed them without doing anything? These are all from the Green Desolate Squadron, right? Why are they so weak? Seeing the scene in the video, everyone in the hall sucked in a breath of cold air. Everyone's faces were filled with shock. Those who had requested to go out to battle earlier were now filled with fear. If the goddess had allowed them to go out to battle, they would most likely have died without a doubt. It's him. The old woman on the throne and the young girl standing in front of her looked at the image, but their gazes were attracted by the person behind the young girl. They were somewhat astonished. They didn't expect that he was still alive after so long. They didn't see Dean after they came to the giant wall. They knew that he was in the wilderness. The wilderness was extremely dangerous. Even if he was a master, he couldn't stay for a long time. But after so long, not only was Dean alive, but he also came back. In addition to them, there were two inconspicuous figures in the hall. They were also shocked and surprised. It's Dean. He's back. Their eyes were full of excitement as they clenched their fists. At this time, the young girl in the video was moving forward. There were arrows, bullets, cannonballs and other long-range attacks along the way. However, all of them were dodged or caught without causing any damage. In less than a few minutes, a figure suddenly flew out from the screen, rushing out like a cannonball. The two wings on his back were like giant palms, covered with blood vessels and protruding meridians. It was the burly man Pooty who had left the hall earlier. They have gone. Come on, Pooty. Seeing Pooty arrive, everyone in the palace breathed a sigh of relief, but they were still a little nervous. Judging from the fiery girl's previous moves, she was undoubtedly a ruler, and could even be considered an extremely powerful existence among rulers. Pooty and Sun Shi alone might not be a match for her, but they could at least delay her. Pooty had already rushed in front of the young girl while everyone was thinking about it. Whoosh! Pooty's strange wings suddenly clenched. They were like two huge fists as they fiercely smashed towards the young girl. Bang! Pooty's body froze. He used all his strength to stop his body from tilting. Then, everyone saw the flames on the flaming girl's arm recede. She raised her slender white hand and pressed it on Pooty's gigantic wings. In the next moment, flames emerged from her fingertips, which were as tender as a spring onion, and spread rapidly. Whoosh! In just a moment, the flame climbed all over Pooty's body. From the video, everyone could see Pooty's screams. His face was full of pain as his body quickly fell. At the same time he fell, a black light suddenly shot out from the building below. It was as fast as lightning and instantly shot towards the young girl's back, revealing a figure. It was Sun Shi, who had come with them. At this moment, Sun Shi had a black tail on her back. Her whole body was covered in fine black fur, and there was a small horn on her head. Her figure was still beautiful and curvaceous. Everyone could see her flat stomach and full breasts. Her claws with long fingernails were tightly holding two black daggers. When she got close to the young girl's back, her body suddenly spun, and the daggers danced in a whirlwind. Spiral stab. This was Sun Shi's best combat technique. Bang! A ball of flame suddenly shot out from the young girl's back. It instantly enveloped the black spiral blade storm and sent her flying. She fell in an arc far away, her body burning like a meteor. Hiss! Everyone in the hall took a deep breath. Everyone's eyes were wide open, and their faces were full of disbelief. In just one move, two dominators were actually defeated. They are from the abyss? After a short silence, a voice full of shock said. Everyone immediately regained their senses. Without a doubt, this kind of strength was definitely from the abyss. Goddess, I request to activate the divine light wave. Goddess, only the divine light wave can kill them. Someone immediately shouted to the goddess on the stairs, his eyes filled with urgency. In fact, there was no need for them to request. The young girl had already realized the seriousness of the problem when Pooty was defeated. She had already passed the order to the golden-armored Desolate Guard, who had already brought her order to the Wilderness God Hall at the back. Buzz. The entire hall was slightly buzzing. Everyone felt a tremor under their feet, as if there was a slight earthquake. Feeling this familiar tremor, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. They secretly admired the goddess's quick reaction. So, the goddess leaped up from the stairs and flew out of the hall. Everyone followed closely behind and walked out in a line. In front of the palace there were 1,000 steps. It was majestic, and on the plaza beside the steps there were 2 statues of origami. They were more than 100 meters tall. The face of the origami was not Sylvia, but the origami that they worshipped, the one in the Earth Dragon Cave. At this moment, beside the 2 origami statues, the floor was raised. The floor was actually made of metal, supported by a half-meter thick steel frame. 2 cannons slowly rose from the ground, looking like ancient chariots. Below them was a base that was more than 10 meters long and 4 to 5 meters tall. On top of it, there was a bright silver cannon barrel that was more than 20 meters long, reflecting a dazzling rainbow halo under the sunlight. Charge! The goddess's eyes were filled with majesty as she said in a deep voice. Below the cannon barrel, there were 2 warriors wearing silver armor with strange patterns engraved on their bodies. Hearing the goddess's order, they immediately grabbed the whistle in front of their chest and blew it. Very quickly, there was a glass-like transparent area behind the cannon barrel. Obvious light was gathering, gradually filling up the transparent area. Lock the target, fall down a dozen, and prepare to fire, the goddess said in a low voice. After that, Dean's face flashed in her mind. She silently said in her heart, "I'm sorry, you shouldn't have been so overbearing. I'm not ungrateful." So, Dana moved forward, killing all the enemies along the way. Looking at the palace that was getting closer and closer, her expression was calm. There was no joy nor sorrow in her expression. Dean followed closely. Looking at the army that was rushing along the way, he sighed slightly. Suddenly, he felt something in his heart and looked up to the front. At the same time, Dana seemed to feel something as well. After breaking the neck of a warrior that was rushing towards her, she looked up to the front, at the distant bustling place. Huh! Dana slightly frowned. Suddenly, she had an inexplicable feeling of uneasiness and trepidation. It was as if something terrible was about to appear. Her premonition had always been accurate, but she was a little puzzled. What could the Amelie tribe have that could threaten her? She suddenly felt a bit of regret. The 2 sovereigns she had killed earlier had very high statuses here, and she had not read their memories. Otherwise, she would definitely have found out more. She put away the idea of a strong attack. She wondered if she should take a detour and capture a few rulers to investigate before attacking. She didn't want to fail because of carelessness. While she was thinking, suddenly, a strong chill surged, causing the hair on her body to stand up. A terrifying feeling of danger instantly enveloped her body, and even her scalp felt a little numb. What was that? She was shocked and a little scared at the same time. So, in her line of sight, a dazzling light suddenly appeared, like a white... No! Her pupils contracted, and she wanted to turn her body to avoid it, but the white light arrived in an instant. By the time she saw it, it had already arrived. A sharp pain came from her chest. It was hot and cold at the same time, as if she could feel a cold wind passing through her chest. The white light still remained on her retina, but the attack was over. She looked down in a daze. She could see the buildings on the ground behind her through her chest. Her chest had been completely penetrated. This is impossible. Her body fell quickly. Dean also fell with Dana. His left arm was missing, and there was a hole in his left wing. He had sensed the danger in advance, guessed some things, and reacted in time. Otherwise, it wouldn't be his left arm that was missing, but his head. Laser cannon. No, it's not an ordinary laser cannon, such a range. Dean's mind was occupied by pain and shock. Looking at Dana, whose chest had been pierced, his mind suddenly heated up, and his heart was excited. He didn't even care about the pain. One dead. Haha, who cares about the abyss? It's nothing in front of the divine light. Back then, that guy called Aristotle was scared to tears by our divine light waves. You think it's the abyss? You dare to invade casually? You're courting death. On the steps of the palace, everyone looked at the image projected outside the steps, and cheered excitedly. Looking at Dean, who fell with her, the goddess took a deep breath and ordered, "Charge, prepare the second shot, 10 seconds countdown." The silver-armored warrior under the base of the battery immediately whistled. Soon, the second cannonball was charged. At this time, the scene of Dean and Dana falling appeared on the projection. Dean quickly crawled with one arm, and his whole body was demonized. Soon, he dug a hole in the ground, and used several sharp blade limbs to gently roll Aisha next to him, and drilled in. On the other side, Dana, because of the force of the fall, smashed a deep pit in the ground, and raised a lot of dust. For a while, no one could see the body clearly. So fast. Unfortunately, our divine light has a life-tracking device. Haha, you were arrogant before, but now you're running away like a dog. This time, we've avenged Pooty and Senxi. Unfortunately, we didn't know that these two bastards were abyss, and let them die in vain. Amidst the excited shouts of the crowd, the second divine light cut through the sky. In the underground, Dean's scalp suddenly tingled, and his whole body was covered with goosebumps. Without thinking, he quickly broke through the ground above his head. Bang! When his upper body had just drilled out of the ground, the only remaining leg was suddenly pierced by the beam of light, and there was nothing below the knee. Dean groaned in pain and fell to the ground. His forehead was full of cold sweat, and the excitement in his heart was gone. He didn't expect such a terrible attack to have a second one, and then a fourth one. Was he going to be killed as soon as he was free? Dean's heart was filled with grief and indignation. He looked at Aisha, who was curled up by the sharp blade. Because of her excessive movements, the blade tightened and cut a few scratches on her body. The strange blade was too sharp and wasn't meant to be used for protection. Dean was sad to see that she was hurt because of him. He clenched his teeth and suddenly hugged her and kissed her deeply on the forehead. Live, even in such a posture. Dean looked at her, and the grief in his eyes was gone, leaving only gentleness and a touch of sadness. The next moment, he pushed her out, and at the same time pulled out the golden bell from his waist, and shook a series of special rhythmic bells for 5 seconds. Chapter 992. Bang! The moment the bell was crushed, Aisha, who had been expressionless, suddenly stamped her feet and flew out like an arrow. She did not rush to Dean but flew in the opposite direction at full speed without looking back. Go. Anyway, live. Dean looked at her figure slowly shrinking in his sight. The tenderness in his eyes was gradually replaced by pain. He did not expect that in the end. He could only stop here after struggling for a lifetime. There were no miracles, no luck. Among all living beings, who had been blessed by God. Whoosh! Aisha's figure gradually became so small that it was difficult to see clearly. He could only faintly see the pioneers flying away along the way. The power of the abyss level was revealed at this moment. Even if she did not enter the demonic body, no one could stop her. It's finally over. We are all free, we are all free. Dean was lying on the ground, looking at the blue sky above his head. The suppressed tiredness in his heart surged like a tide. The slightly erect hair reminded him that danger would come again, but he had no strength to avoid it. He did not even want to hide anymore. Whoosh! A white light suddenly shot out. With a bang, the blazing light beam illuminated the street and shrouded it. The dust quickly dissipated in the light, turning into powder and annihilating into the smallest matter. Bastard! Above the palace, the excited people were now full of anger. They did not have the slightest excitement of annihilating the enemy. They saw that the turrets on both sides of the palace steps were slightly tilted at this moment. The silver-armored warriors under the turrets had fallen into a pool of blood. Standing next to their bodies were two tall and burly young figures. One was a handsome blonde youth with a noble label. The other was slightly younger, seemed to be about 23 or 24 years old. He had short brown hair and a burly figure like a bear. He looked very ordinary, but with thick eyebrows and big eyes, he had a majestic aura. Traitors! How dare you betray the Divine Lady? Kill them! These lowly people of the original wall should not have been left. Kill them! The people around the Divine Lady were so angry that their faces were somewhat distorted. They were so angry that their bodies were trembling. They were ready to welcome the victory and cheer. However, at the critical moment, two insignificant characters among them, who had always been silent and inconspicuous, actually rushed out and pushed the cannons in an attempt to stop their attack. If they succeeded, it would be equivalent to giving that abyss creature a chance to live. That would be their doomsday. Fear and anger. Everyone roared, and without waiting for the goddess's orders, they all activated their demonic bodies and rushed towards the two people beside the battery, wanting to tear them apart. The two of them looked at each other and activated their demonic bodies at the same time. Instead of facing the swarming crowd, they turned their backs to them and bombarded the battery with all their strength. Bang! Bang! The cannon emitted a loud noise from the impact, and the ground of the entire palace trembled slightly. Die! Die! Kill! Sharp, hoarse, and weird voices that were half male and half female roared. The demonization did not only change their bodies, but also their throats and vocal cords. The two of them roared and launched their second wave of attack. Boom! The fort trembled, swaying slightly, but it didn't overturn. The ferocious roars behind them were still approaching, and a trace of despair and unwillingness flashed in their eyes. Was this all they could do? Whoosh! The air suddenly became scorching hot, as if the sun hanging in the sky was approaching. The high temperature made everyone feel like they were about to be melted. The two of them felt the terrifying heat coming from behind them and couldn't help but turn around in horror. Then, they saw a crimson figure filling every corner of their eyes. Bang! The floor was smashed open, and the heat instantly swept out like a volcanic eruption. The strange demonized crowd that was pouncing towards the two of them didn't have time to stop in their shock. The next moment, a nearly solid magma-like flow of heat swept out like a ring of fire, with this blazing figure as the starting point, bounced towards the two of them. Whoosh! The flames swept out, and everyone was instantly ignited, and their bodies were cut in half at the waist. Screams and cries of horror spread throughout the entire palace. On this day, the guards and maids in the palace witnessed a scene that they would never forget in their entire lives. A figure as beautiful and domineering as the blazing sun slowly rose from the front of the palace. She was like a fire phoenix but also like a fire dragon. Her posture was perfect, and she stole all the light from the heavens and the earth, causing everything around her to lose its color. Impossible! The goddess, who didn't make a move on the steps, saw the blazing figure suddenly jump out from the ground. Her delicate face, which was frowning because of the betrayal of the two people, was suddenly filled with shock. The next moment, she reacted in less than half a second, turned around, and ran into the palace hall without looking back. The door of the hall slowly closed after she entered. The last scene that was revealed from the gap of the closed door was that the demonized bodies of the people in the hall had turned into flaming flowers, bloomed in the air, and then withered. The two people at the base of the fort were completely stunned. Looking at this incredible scene that suddenly reversed, they couldn't believe their eyes. It seems that he didn't make the wrong friends. The figure bathed in flames turned around slightly, and the flames on her face dissipated a little, revealing a pair of bright and beautiful eyes. They were like limpid autumn waters, but also like the cold ice of the extreme north. Her tone was calm, but it carried the majesty of a superior. After that, she turned her head, and her body swooped down like a flaming meteor. Boom! The closed door of the palace was suddenly dented, and a hole was broken. This towering palace door was actually made of heavy metal, but at this moment there was a very deep arc in the dent, and the edge of the crack was scorched black, and even the metal seemed to show signs of melting. "She's not dead." The two people slowly came to their senses, but they were still quite shocked. With such a big hole in her chest, where her heart had been turned to ashes, she was still alive? She was simply a monster. However, the two people's attention quickly returned to another place, and their eyes quickly looked at the blurry projection in the air, only to see that the divine light wave had disappeared, and the target of the attack had already dispersed, and they saw a bottomless hole in the ground. At the edge of the hole, less than a few centimeters away, a figure was lying, eyes closed, motionless. It missed. Seeing this scene, the two people were extremely surprised, and they were so excited that they wanted to hug each other. But soon, the blonde youth quickly said, "Let's go quickly, the energy wave seems to have swept him. He's unconscious, and we can't let others get close." "Yes. Young master, we're coming." Trembling with excitement, the two people entered the demon body, jumped down from the palace, and rushed quickly. Although the area of Royal City was large and could accommodate tens of millions of people, with the speed of the two people, if they walked in a straight line, they arrived at Dean's side in less than half an hour. They saw that the scene was already full of people, and many residents living nearby also came to see the excitement. When they saw that the destroyed building was only a few streets away from their homes, they could not help but secretly rejoice. The two people pushed the surrounding crowd, and forced their way in, only to see a team of pioneers had formed a phalanx, surrounding Dean inside, and around them were frontiersman-level warriors coming to clean up the scene and disperse the crowd. The two people looked at each other, slightly gritted their teeth, and suddenly rushed out of the crowd. "Who?" The captain of the pioneers was shocked to see the figure suddenly jumping out. This invasion was unforgettable for him, and he thought that the enemy had other accomplices. When he saw the face and dress of the newcomer, the hostility on his face quickly disappeared, and he put on a smile. "It turns out to be the two masters, you are? The goddess wants him, give him to us," the blonde youth said coldly. The captain of the pioneers did not doubt him, and said with a smile, "We are going to give it to the goddess, but we are afraid to wake him up, so we dare not touch him. He has been dealt with. Tell the crowd to disperse, and you also disperse, and return to your respective posts," the blonde youth ordered. "Yes, master." The captain of the pioneers nodded respectfully. Anyway, if the thing was handed over to the other side, even if there was a problem, it was none of his business. He also did not dare to stay with a terrible existence who dared to invade Royal City. Although the latter seemed unconscious at the moment, who knew when he would wake up? Maybe in the next second. The pioneers separated, and the two people stepped forward, looking at the familiar face on the ground, a burst of heat in their eyes, and slightly clenched their fists. The blonde youth bent down to carry the body, turned around, and left. The brown-haired youth followed him, and the two people pushed the crowd and quickly left. Half an hour later, the two people took a detour out of Royal City, and came to the wilderness. "To the dark fortress," the blonde youth said, aimed in a direction, and rushed in a straight line at full speed. It didn't take long for the two to come to the Earl's city, and with the badge on their armor, they rushed all the way. The soldiers guarding the gate avoided far away, and didn't dare to block the way. After the two left, they enviously looked at their backs. It didn't take long for the two to come to a manor in the city. After entering, the owner of the manor, who was a noble, immediately came forward to greet them. "Hey, this is?" The owner of the manor saw the blonde youth carrying Dean, and was a little surprised and puzzled. He felt that he had seen Dean before. The two ignored him, and quickly entered the manor. It seemed that they were the owner of this place, but in fact the word "seemed" could be removed. The two walked into a secret passage of the manor, and the owner of the manor slightly bowed, and put his hand on his chest, and respectfully sent them off with noble etiquette. At the end of the secret passage was a square, and there were many buildings, and the dome was full of bright chandeliers, all of which were emitting electricity, and were as bright as day. The two found a hall, and ordered all the people who were working inside to leave. At the moment, the consul who was on duty saw the two, and quickly ran over to greet them. "The best room, the best doctor, and don't let anyone disturb you." The blond youth stared at the consul and said quickly, "Yes, sir." Bang! A beam of light shot out. Dana, who was bathed in flames, slightly tilted her head, and the beam passed through her neck, and at the same time penetrated the dome of the hall behind her. "How is it possible?" The goddess was shocked, and looked at the silver gun in her hand. It wasn't an ordinary bullet gun, but a laser gun. In such an attack range, it was absolutely impossible to dodge. However, the person in front of her dodged it, and it was so easy. Laser gun technology is indeed much more advanced, but it's a pity that the development is a little abnormal, and other aspects are too close to primitive society. Dana turned her head back and stood in the air, looking down at the goddess and the old woman behind her. "Great goddess! How can you still be alive?" The goddess gritted her teeth. She felt as if God was playing a joke on her. Her heart was pierced, but she was still alive. Wasn't this a deliberate attempt to kill her? "You're Amelie, right? You're quite a ruthless girl. You even tried to kill your benefactor. Fortunately, those two little fellows were loyal enough to stop you in time. Otherwise, my experimental subjects would have been destroyed by you." Dana's expression was indifferent, but her tone was old. "Tell me, what kind of death do you want?" The goddess was Amelie. She stared at Dana. "You can't blame me for this. Who told him to take you on a rampage? He wanted to occupy the giant wall. If he had come back quietly, I would have given him half of the ruling power. But he obviously wants to take everything away. This is the foundation of our tribe. We will never give it away." "Ha ha!" Dana gently smiled. "Frog at the bottom of the well, you are satisfied with just one person. Pathetic human." Her body slowly floated towards Amelie. Whoosh! Whoosh! Amelie quickly pulled the trigger and several lasers were shot out. Dana's body slightly swayed as the lasers flew past the edge of her body. The heat was like a dagger cutting her body. But she was bathed in flames, so she didn't care about the burning sensation. "How is this possible?" Amelie's pupils dilated. Her face was full of shock. She continued to pull the trigger. However, all the lasers missed. Whoosh! Dana's body suddenly flashed and appeared next to Amelie. She raised her hand and grabbed Amelie's hand that was holding the gun. She smiled and said, "The gun is a good thing. Unfortunately, the person who uses it is too weak. It's so easy to predict the trajectory of the bullet. It's really shameful." Amelie's face suddenly turned ugly. She tried to struggle but couldn't get rid of Dana's hand. It was like an iron hoop that firmly locked her wrist. "Give it to me," Dana said with a smile. She slightly shook her wrist and Amelie's hand involuntarily loosened. She groaned in pain. The laser gun fell into Dana's hand. She appreciated it for a moment. Her mouth curved into a smile. Her fingers suddenly lengthened and pierced Amelie's forehead. "Stop!" An angry roar came from the side, and the hunchbacked high priest suddenly stood up. The wrinkled skin all over his body suddenly shrunk, recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye, turning from withered yellow to white and tender. His skin also slowly expanded, without wrinkles, so tender that water could almost be squeezed out. "It's not your turn yet." Dana's eyes were indifferent. She raised her hand and shot. Bang! Chapter 993. Don't move. Dana shot the gun at the high priest's forehead. Dana tilted her head slightly, her expression cold. The high priest, who had just regained her youthfulness and combat power, was speechless. She gritted her teeth and suppressed her anger. What on earth do you want? Everything here. Dana's answer was simple and direct. Amelie had stopped struggling as if she was in shock, but her body trembled from time to time as if her pain nerves were triggered. The high priest stared at her angrily. She controlled the muscles in her palm to stop the bleeding, but she did not dare to move her body. If it was just a competition of strength, she thought she could take 1 or 2 blows. But Dana had a laser gun in her hand, and she had already made the first move. Even if she had a laser gun in her hand, there was no time for her to pull it out. The laser gun was useless in Amelie's hand, but in Dana's hand, it was completely different. Amelie could not compare with the speed and trajectory of the gun. After a few minutes of stalemate, Dana flung Amelie, who was still unconscious, towards the high priest. The high priest hurriedly caught it, but the wound on Amelie's forehead had disappeared. As if it was sucked by a leech, the wound healed automatically without any blood flowing out. Amelia snorted and slowly opened her eyes. She was a little dazed, but when she saw the face of the high priestess, she was shocked. The next moment, she suddenly raised her hand and pointed her fingers like a knife. Puff! Under the shocked gaze of the high priestess, her fingers stabbed into her plump chest. Go to hell! Amelie quickly retreated and returned to Dana. She stared at the high priest coldly. Amelie! The high priest stared blankly. She never thought she would face her with such an expression. The killing intent in her eyes was not fake. Did she want to kill her? She was a little confused, but mostly sad. Dana, who was standing behind Amelia, had already recovered from her thoughts. She looked at the high priest with interest. I didn't expect your race to be born like this. You call yourself the descendants of the Aragami. Don't you think it's funny and pitiful to call yourself that every time? The Grand Priest's gaze slowly shifted from Amelia to Dana. She suddenly realized that Amelia seemed to have changed into another person. It should have something to do with this woman. She took a deep breath and covered her injured chest. She asked in a low voice, "What did you do to her?" "It's just a simple memory modification." Dana wasn't annoyed that she didn't answer obediently. She chuckled and said, "Your clan is very interesting. Originally, based on your previous sins, I wouldn't have spared any of you. But now, all of you have the qualifications to be my experimental subject. With all of you as the foundation, the success rate of my experiment has increased by another 20%. Fate seems to be guiding me, giving me everything I need, haha. Experiment subject. Great Priest's face slightly changed. He suddenly remembered that she had described Dean as a test subject. Are you the ruler of the kingdom of God? No, but I will soon be. Dana smiled. The flames gradually converged into her body, revealing her delicate and slender body. At this moment, the Great Priest suddenly saw that on her chest, the hole that had been penetrated by the divine light wave was now filled with dark purple wriggling limbs. They were like poisonous snakes intertwining with each other, twisting slightly. The scene was nauseating. You are not a human." The Grand Priest's pupils shrank as she screamed in horror. "I am God, the future God." Dana slightly raised her head. Her body slowly flew in front of the Grand Priest. She looked down at the Grand Priest. She slowly stretched out her slender hand and pressed on the Grand Priest's forehead. The Grand Priest wanted to resist, but her body was shrouded by a kind of aura. It seemed that as long as she moved, she would face a thunderous attack. Dana's fingers quickly turned into sharp thorns and pierced into the Grand Priest's forehead. The Grand Priest's eyes were flickering, but her body suddenly stiffened. She slowly closed her eyes. After a long time, Dana slightly gasped for breath. It seemed that she had experienced a bitter battle. After adjusting for a moment, she exhaled lightly and looked at the Grand Priest, who still had his eyes closed. Her eyes showed a bit of disgust and excitement. Interesting body, interesting idea, so interesting, I hope you can bring me a surprise. Young master. Young master. Someone called out in the darkness. Who is it? Dean slowly opened his eyes. His vision changed from fuzzy to clear. He saw several faces close to him in the dim light. Their faces were full of tension, concern, and surprise. He felt that his brain was a little mushy. His brain paused for a few seconds before he slowly reacted. He recognized these familiar faces and couldn't help but slightly widen his eyes. Is it you? Dean felt like he was dreaming, but his physical discomfort reminded him that he wasn't dead. It's us, young master. You finally woke up. Young master, we have been waiting for you to come back. They looked at Dean in excitement. It seemed that they had a lot of words to say. Noyce, Barton, Mason, Zach, Aurora. Dean looked at the faces. He felt his blood warm up. It was as if he had come to the desert from the North Pole. His mind slowly calmed down. Where am I? Wasn't I hit by that thing before? He knew the power of that thing. There was only one possibility that he was still alive, and that was that the thing had missed its mark. Young master, this is the Dark Fortress. It's our territory. The blonde Noyce said with a silly smile on his face. When the third divine light wave was fired, Barton and I hit the cannon barrel. The direction was a bit off, so it was shot askew. Dean was puzzled. Magic wave? Where did this thing come from? Why are you there? It's the secret weapon of the palace. It was made by the invaders. Noyce was the most eloquent of them all. He quickly said, Barton and I were there. We are counselors of the royal palace. We were ready to stop the first wave of divine light, but the others were watching with rapt attention. It was very difficult for us to catch them off guard. As a result, you were almost in danger. I deserve to die 10,000 times over. He bowed his head and knelt down. Barton, who was next to him, also knelt down. Mason, Zach, and Aurora, who were standing on the other side, were embarrassed. They wanted to say something but held back. Dean saw that Mason and Zach didn't seem to be as casual as they used to be. The relationship between them seemed to be a bit strange. He couldn't help but feel regret. Get up. I said that you don't need to kneel to anyone. Dean helped Noyce up. They didn't resist as they knew that Dean didn't like to play. You are the counselors of the palace. What's going on? Dean asked curiously. Noyce was relieved as he heard that there was no blame in Dean's tone. He slowly told the story to Dean. So that's how it is. Dean gradually understood what happened during this period of time. After he left, Noyce and others followed his instructions. They changed their household registration information and erased all traces. They took the resources he gave them and lurked around the giant wall. It didn't take long for the previous wall Lord Aristotle to return. The messenger of the kingdom of God came back with him. He rode a dragon and landed in the palace. The messenger didn't return on the same day but stayed in the palace. Aristotle was furious as he heard about the shocking changes in the giant wall. He massacred all the soldiers that Noyce had sent to stay in the palace. He liberated the suppressed nobles and searched for Dean and Noyce. He found many accomplices. For example, Pope Richelieu of the Outer Wall had been coerced by Dean. He was addicted to drugs and no longer had the bearing of a pope. He had become a skinny old man with no temperament. He was caught in a pub selling marijuana. He was paraded through the streets of the 12 Earls and then executed. In addition to Pope Richelieu, many elders of the Dark Church, including Hawkeye, who had followed Dean, were caught and beheaded. Although they erased their identity information, they had a deep foundation, unlike Noyce and Barton, who had a shallow foundation and erased it cleanly. Hawkeye and the Pope have been in high positions for many years, and the number of people they have been in contact with is hundreds and thousands of times more than Noyce and the others. The more complicated the relationship network is, the harder it is to wipe it clean. Aristotle was trying to find the remnants of the rebels while he was rebuilding the order of the inner wall. All the major families and the Monster Research Institute were restored to their former status. In just half a month it seemed as if the whole world had turned upside down for the residents of the inner wall. There had been earth-shaking changes. But at this time a light came over the giant wall. The invaders who claimed to be the desolate race came out of a huge, majestic spaceship. The messenger of the kingdom of God was the first to bear the brunt. He rode a dragon but didn't say a few words before he was shot dead by the light outside the spaceship. Aristotle was frightened and tried to escape, but he was still caught. Then a new round of changes began. Noyce, Mason, Barton and others who were lucky enough to survive came out from the dark after the desolate race completely took control of the giant wall. They pretended to work for the desolate race. They wanted to get an official position. They wanted to grasp the internal intelligence of the desolate race and wait for Dean to come back. However, in the end, only the talkative Noyce and the honest Barton were able to get the position of counselors. But it was just a nominal position without any real power. Amelie was interested in them because they were very familiar with the circles of the inner wall. It was beneficial to help them completely master all the forces within the giant wall as soon as possible. "Is this your secret gathering place?" Dean looked at the place where he was lying. It was a dimly lit room with luxurious decorations. He chuckled. "You have stolen the light and dark division method used by the monastery to manage the outer wall." Barton laughed foolishly and said, "Young master, although this monastery is not strong, their method is still very effective." Dudian nodded. Even a 3-year-old child could speak the truth of the world. Even in the Shernluo Empire, perhaps there was a similar management system. Even if the method came from a small giant wall like Sylvia, it wouldn't seem inferior. Everything in the world was the same. "I haven't seen you for a long time. It seems that you have learned a lot." Dean could feel the changes in them. Although Barton looked as honest as before, but his mind had become more delicate and black-bellied. Noyce, on the other hand, was better at hiding his true thoughts. He became more shrewd. As for Mason and Zack, he thought that they were not familiar with each other. But after Noyce's observation, he found that it wasn't the case. They had become more mature and knew how to control interpersonal relationship. However, what made Dean gratified was that no matter how big the change was, their loyalty to him didn't change at all. This could be seen from the fact that Noyce and Barton risked their lives to open the cannon for him. If it weren't for them, he would have been dead by now. "How long have I been in a coma?" Dean asked. 2 days. Noyce smiled. Dean's heart tightened but soon relaxed. As long as he was alive, then Amelia's tribe would not be a problem. As long as he wasn't as arrogant as Dana. Even if he was a dominator, he would be able to regain control of the giant wall. Not to mention with his current strength, only the lightsaber could pose a threat to him. Of course, it wasn't ruled out that Amelia's tribe had prepared something else. This lightsaber shouldn't be an ordinary laser cannon. It has such a long range. Dean's eyes flashed. Such a weapon was suitable for long-range attacks, but it was weak in close range. Thinking of this, he could not help but smile. Although Dana had read his memories and knew about the existence of the laser cannon, she had not expected the Amelia tribe to have such a long-range laser weapon like the Divine Ray Wave in such a short period of time. Dana wouldn't be so arrogant if she knew about this. Moreover, the lightsaber was hidden deep. Dana had read the Dragon Pioneer's memory but didn't see it. Due to these factors, Dana had become cannon fodder for him. Dean couldn't help but laugh. He looked at Noyce. "What's the situation in the palace? Did they send people to kill you?" "No." Neos shook his head. "According to our scouts, your friend has captured the Divine Daughter and the High Priest. She has already taken away the ruling rights of the palace. However, during this period of time, she did not leave the palace. Instead, she went to the desolate race's forbidden grounds behind the palace. So I'm not too sure of the exact situation inside." After he finished, he suddenly found that Dean was stunned on the bed. "Master?" Dean slowly opened his eyes. "Who did you just say?" Chapter 994. Dean felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. "She didn't die? Master, is she your enemy?" Noyce was aware of the problem. He and Barton were present at the time, so they knew how fierce the woman's strength was. If she was an enemy, then it would be a disaster. Dean was in a daze for a long time. He had experienced several great joys and sorrows in a short period of time. He had a feeling of collapse. However, his strong mind and endurance made him restrain himself. He wanted to roar in his heart, but his body was numb as he sat on the bed. He felt powerless at this moment. The joyous atmosphere in the room dropped to the ice valley. Barton, Mason, Aurora, and others looked at each other. They didn't expect to face a more terrifying enemy after escaping from Amelia tribe. It wasn't difficult to see from Dean's situation that the woman was stronger than him. "Master, should we move immediately? With your strength you can survive even if you go to other giant wall. We are willing to follow you." Noyce recovered and immediately came up with a plan. Although he knew that Dean already had the answer in his heart. Dean was silent for a moment. He shook his head. "I have nowhere to go. If what you said is true, then there are only 3 possibilities for her to stay in the palace for 2 days. The first is that she is seriously injured and needs to recuperate immediately. Second is that there is something in the palace that attracted her so that she can't take care of me. Third is that she knows my position. If I plan to escape, she will immediately appear. The first possibility is 30%, the second possibility is 10%, and the third possibility is the highest." Noyce and Barton were startled. Mason asked, "How did she know your position?" Dean looked up at him and said, "She should have installed a tracking device in my body. I have been in a coma for the past 2 days, so she didn't come over." They looked at each other. They didn't expect Dean's situation to be so embarrassing. It was no different from a prisoner. "No matter what, we should still give it a try, but don't hold too much hope." Dean put away the negative emotions in his heart and said, "You can't be exposed. Continue to lurk according to your original trajectory. If I sacrifice myself, don't look for her for revenge. The only one who can defeat her besides herself is probably God." "God?" Noyce and Barton looked at each other. They didn't expect that woman to be so terrifying. Wasn't she invincible? "If you can live longer and become stronger in the future, then do me a favor." Dean looked up and seriously looked at them. "If I have a corpse, then help me preserve it. If you find Aisha in the future, then give my corpse to her. It is best to let her eat it." Their hearts trembled as they looked at him in a daze. When their eyes met Dudien's eyes, they found that the teenager who was in high spirits and had control of everything was now covered with wind and frost. The childishness on his face had long faded. His young face was very mature. In the blink of an eye, how much time had passed. The few of them were a bit absent-minded. Only now did they suddenly realize that time had rushed past their bodies, carving many traces on them. "Dean, don't say that. No matter what danger there is, I will follow you. This is our agreement." Mason clenched his fists as he spoke in a loud voice. "Master." Barton wanted to say something, but he choked. Although he had trained his eloquence over the years, but he seemed to have returned to his original nature as he stood in front of Dean. He became honest and upright like when he was in the orphanage. Dean shook his head and smiled. "This is the worst-case scenario. I can't escape, but you still have your life. Unfortunately, you won't be able to live a happy life with me for a few days. You will have to live like a mouse that everyone wants to kill." "Master, I would have died in prison if it wasn't for you." Noyce clenched his teeth. There were tears in his eyes. He rarely shed tears, as he had only cried for women. But this time he felt extremely uncomfortable and sad. Barton was Dudien's childhood companion in the orphanage. Mason was Dudien's childhood friend. Barton was Dudien's childhood friend. Barton was Dudien's childhood friend. Barton was the one who followed Dudien for the longest time. Barton was the one who accompanied Dudien for the longest time. Moreover, he had accompanied Dean through the trials and tribulations of the prison. He had experienced the cautious struggle in the early days of the escape. Later he became Dean's assistant. He was more familiar with Dean than Mason and Barton. Such a tenacious and unyielding person under torture was now using a pleading tone to ask for their help. How helpless was this? I have helped you and you have helped me. We are equal. Let's not talk about the past. I would have died if it wasn't for you and Barton. Dean smiled and patted Noyce's shoulder. Noyce and Barton bit their teeth but didn't reply. Dean glanced at them. What about Gwyneth? Aurora grunted and said, She's already dead. Dead? Dean was startled. There was some regret in his heart. Noyce explained. Gwyneth insisted on returning to the magistrate after you left. She came from there and relied on her privileges to become the head of the magistrate. She was ready to rely on her authority to thoroughly investigate the rats in the dark corners of the inner and outer wall. In the end, the nobles, the Monster Research Institute and other major forces had done some despicable deeds in secret. She killed a large number of nobles in anger. She provoked the wrath of the gods and the people inside the giant wall. It didn't take long for the former head of the wall to come back. She was ready to hide her identity, but no force could provide her shelter. Later an aristocrat pretended to protect her but secretly plotted against her. After her identity was exposed, she was beheaded by Aristotle and paraded through the streets for an entire week. It was only when her corpse started to stink that the parades were called off. Dean was startled as he didn't expect Gwyneth to end up in such a miserable state. However, there wasn't much anger on the faces of Noyce, Aurora, Macon and others. After thinking about it for a while, he understood. After all, the biggest underworld forces should be counted as their heads. If Gwyneth wants to pursue these underworld forces, it will inevitably cause friction with them, and they might even turn against each other. So in the end Gwyneth could only seek refuge under the nobles instead of relying on their strength. He sighed deeply. Gwyneth's appearance appeared in his mind. She had just come out of prison. She had followed him to battle. She had the courage to speak up. From a long time ago, Gwyneth had unabashedly expressed her disgust for some despicable act. She had been learning in the magistrate since she was a child. Her views would not change even if she was wronged and imprisoned. She was a good person. It's a pity, Dean murmured. The few of them remained silent. Dean retracted his thoughts after a moment of silence. He didn't mention about Gwyneth anymore. Is there a library here? Take me to see it. Are you going to read? Noyce was surprised. Macon, Barton and others were surprised. Shouldn't they seize the time to escape? Dean smiled. There is a golden house in the books. Noyce knew that Dean wouldn't do useless things, so he didn't ask much. Yes, I can take you there at any time if you recover. Then let's go now. 3 days later. A golden-armored, desolate guard brought a letter to the dark fortress and passed it to Noyce. After reading it, Noyce's face suddenly changed. He took the letter and hurriedly went to the library in the depths of the dark fortress and found a young man who was sitting cross-legged under a bookshelf and flipping through a book. "Master, a letter from the palace," Noyce quickly called out. Dean lifted his eyes from the book and glanced at the letter in Noyce's hand. There was only one sentence in the letter. It was very simple. Have you played enough? Do you need me to personally invite you over? Dean's eyes were calm. He looked at Noyce. It seems that I don't need to escape to test whether she installed a tracking device on me or not. Noyce smiled bitterly. It seems that she has already grasped the Amelie tribe in the palace. With the help of the positioning device on you, she knows about our secret base. Otherwise, she wouldn't have sent the letter directly to you. That golden-armored desolate guard bluntly said that he would send it to you. Don't worry. She isn't interested in the power here. She will leave after the matter is settled. Dean stood up and patted the dust off his body. After she leaves, the desolate race will be hit hard. You can wait for an opportunity to attack. Prepare well during this period of time. If I'm still alive, I'll help you destroy the desolate race. Master. Noyce's eyes were full of worry. He didn't care about the secret base being exposed. Dean patted his shoulder. The messenger of the kingdom of God died here. The kingdom of God will send people to investigate. There are many strong people in the kingdom of God. The road to the throne is unattainable and too difficult. If you can take them to another place and find a giant wall, maybe they will be happier there. Noyce's nose turned sour as he heard Dean's words. Master, if something happens to you, then I'll avenge you. I'll use the rest of my life. Dean shook his head. It's not worth it. I don't want you to tie yourself to my prison after I rescue you from it. You have your own life. Find a village with few people and live a good life. Your Majesty Crimson Moon, the person you invited has arrived. A golden armor guard respectfully said. Above the palace hall, a slender figure wearing a scarlet flame robe sat on the throne, looking down from above. On both sides of the hall were the leaders of many forces, including the earls of the 12 cities, the deans of the Demonic Creature Research Institute, the patriarchs of the demonic hunter families, and so on. Bring him in. An indifferent voice came from the throne, covering the entire hall and reverberating in everyone's ears. Dean was standing outside the hall when he heard Dana's voice. He sighed in his heart and followed the golden-armored desolate guard into the hall. Soon, he saw the patriarch of the Winged Demon clan, the patriarch of the Rock clan, the dean of the monastery, several outstanding academicians of the Monster Research Institute, and several nobles who had flattered him. On the two sides of the throne, Amelia and the great priest could be seen. Familiar faces. Dean chuckled, somewhat self-deprecating. Your Majesty Crimson Moon, Dean has arrived. The golden armor guard respectfully bowed his head. Dinah nodded slightly on the throne and said to Dean, Did you have a good time these days? How could I have a good time without you? Dean chuckled. Dinah raised her eyebrows and a cold light flashed in her eyes. She seemed to have thought of something and her lips curved. Is that so? I'll play with you later. Dean heard her deliberately ambiguous tone and knew that she was angry. He shrugged and said, I hope your skills haven't deteriorated in a few days. The smile on Dinah's face did not diminish. She suddenly realized that she had made a mistake. She was far from being his opponent when it came to flirting with a man. Although the conversation between the two was short, the people on both sides of the hall were surprised. In the past few days, they had heard the inside story of the replacement of the throne from their own intelligence channels. Naturally, they knew Dinah's strength. Dean was an old face to them. He was a legendary figure in the past. However, compared with Dinah, a powerhouse of the abyss, Dean was obviously worse. They just did not expect that Dean would have a relationship with such a figure. Thinking of this, many people looked at Dean with both envy and jealousy in their eyes, but there were also some sighs. Today, I called you here for no other reason than to tell you that you should continue to be my subordinates. Don't play tricks in the dark. Dinah no longer paid attention to Dean and said to the people in the hall. Everyone already knew the purpose of Dinah calling them here was to formally inform them about the replacement of the throne. However, they did not expect that it would be so straightforward and simple. It seemed that there was no subtlety. Did no one hear what I said? Dinah's indifferent face showed a trace of a smile when she saw that no one answered. Yes, the Zhao family will always be loyal to Her Majesty. The Wings of the Hunter clan is willing to be loyal to Her Majesty. Everyone immediately expressed their position and did not dare to stand out at this time. Dinah waved to Amelie next to her and said a few words to her. Then she got up and said to Dean, You come with me. Dean was relieved. Previously, when he saw Amelie calling so many big bosses in the giant wall, he thought that she really wanted to manage the giant wall. Fortunately, she became impatient after a few words and did not want to think about it. Chapter 995. That's my name. Dana didn't look back. She said in an indifferent voice, I named it myself. You have to call me that in the future. Do you understand? Dean slightly curled his lips. Do you want to say goodbye to the past? Why is it called Crimson Moon? Is there any symbolic meaning? Don't confuse me with you mortals. You like to name things with blessings or future expectations. I just want to remember the day I was born. Dana indifferently said. Dean thought for a moment. I don't think there is a festival called Crimson Moon. It's not a festival. Dana walked to the corner of the corridor and glanced at Dudian. The night I was born, the crimson moon was in the sky and the stars were dim. Judging by your Chinese thinking, I am the crimson moon, the daughter of destiny. I am destined to shine like the crimson moon, and you are just the stars around me that you can't see. Dean was a little surprised, and then chuckled. As far as I know, the moon is white, or it can be said to be a silver moon, but to say the crimson moon, it is rare. Of course, it's not strange if I can see it every day. Only this kind of special celestial phenomenon is worthy of me. Dana contemptuously said. Dean faintly smiled but didn't discuss the name with her. He asked, Are the experimental materials ready? You should have gone to Amelia's spaceship after you conquered their tribe. What's the harvest? Don't you want to test it with other experimental subjects? Don't worry. I'll leave you to the end. Dana or Crimson Moon glanced at him as if to say that he didn't need to be afraid of death. Dean didn't care about her eyes and said, You have got the super chip. You haven't finished learning the things inside. It won't be too late to call me when you have finished learning. I don't want to bother you. You're honest. I thought you would be stupid and run away. Crimson Moon's face was indifferent. It's a pity that you let go of such a good experimental subject. Even if you don't use her for experiments, you can still cultivate her into a super fighter. She is the crystallization of the Witcher's experimental subject. Moreover, she has eaten the flesh and blood of the origami. Her potential is much more terrifying than you think. I think she can reach the level of the king just by eating. Dean was startled. He didn't expect this. He couldn't help but say, It's not that exaggerated. Even if undeads rely on eating to evolve, there should be a limit. How much food does she have to eat to reach the king level? Who knows? In any case, this land lacks everything, but it doesn't lack people or monsters. Crimson Moon pushed open the door to the back of the palace and said as she walked, But it's fine even if she eats until she becomes a king. The ones who should have a headache are those fellows in the Empire. Once our experiment is complete, it will be very easy to find her. I don't believe that she can climb over the War God Wall. Dean was shocked. Indeed, if Aisha ran all the way to the War God Wall, relying on the bloodthirsty nature of the undeads, she would inevitably rush up and slaughter, and then the king of the Empire would be alarmed to suppress her. Thinking of this, his heart was a little nervous. Crimson Moon seemed to see through Dean's thoughts. She sneered. Think about yourself. You can't even protect yourself. It's ridiculous to think so much. Dean glanced at her coldly. Suddenly, he thought of something. His eyes glanced at her chest, which was still round and plump. Under the cloak was a scarlet tight armor, which made her petite and graceful figure very tempting. He raised his eyebrows. I remember that your heart was pierced by that thing at that time. You didn't die? He spoke very straightforwardly. Crimson Moon glanced at him indifferently. I'm sorry to disappoint you. For me, the heart is no longer a fatal organ. This isn't some special ability. If you want, I can modify you a little so that you can also obtain this kind of immortality. How about it? When he learned that she was not dead, Dean thought of this, but he didn't expect it to be true. So, the only fatal organ left was her brain? Or, even if her brain was cut off, it might not be able to kill her? If there's a chance in the future, I'll dismember her body and burn her to ashes with fire. That's the safest way, Dean thought secretly. Crimson Moon glanced at him. Her eyes seemed to be looking directly into the depths of his heart. There was a kind of breathtaking insight. She beckoned a teenager from the side and said, "Take him to do a physical examination." The back hall had been transformed into a laboratory. It was filled with advanced tools used by alchemists of the life school. Many masked figures were busy in front of various instruments. They looked to be in their 50s or 60s. Some of them had gray hair, and some of them had white hair. The boy was the youngest among them. Apart from him, the other 3 middle-aged men were the youngest. When the teenager saw Dean, he was a little shocked, especially when he saw that Dean's legs below the knees were all broken, and he only walked with the demonized blades extending from his knees. His eyes widened even more. "What? Haven't you seen a disabled person before?" Dean smiled at the teenager. The shock on the teenager's face quickly disappeared. He glanced at Crimson Moon, who was frowning at him, and hurriedly bowed his head to apologize. Then he helped Dean to another instrument and let Dean lie down for a physical examination. "From today on, you'll live here. You can't leave without my order. Everything you eat and drink can only be provided by me. You're not allowed to eat any other food. Do you understand?" Crimson Moon came over and ordered Dean, who was lying on the examination bed. Dean finally knew why she called him over so early. It was to observe the changes in his body index in advance. He nodded and said, "Got it." Crimson Moon turned and left. After saying a few words to the others, she went to a separate small room in the depths of the rear hall. Dean glanced at her with his X-ray vision and saw her sitting in the small room, taking out the superchip and the screen board to study. I'm going to draw your blood and test your magic mark. Please take off your clothes." The teenager bowed his head and said very politely. Dean took a deep look at him. He didn't answer. He directly raised his hand and tore off his clothes. He lay naked on the examination bed and closed his eyes. Chapter 996. Blood Test. Fat percentage covering 12%. Magic Mark Activity Test. Dean lay down and let the youth test his body. He closed his eyes and thought about his own things. When all the required specimens were collected, the youth helped Dean up and said nervously, "You can go to the side and rest for a while." Dean looked at him and asked, "What's your name?" The youth's face changed slightly. He bowed his head and said, "My name is Sangba." "Sangba." Dean muttered and nodded slightly. He got up from the bed and condensed a magic blade on his severed knee. He stood on the ground and pierced the floor, creating a crack. He walked toward the rest area on the other side of the back hall. At lunchtime, a maidservant brought over a medium-well steak and a cup of milk. After eating, Dean lay on the sofa and continued to rest with his eyes closed. Fei Yu stayed in the small room, concentrating on learning the knowledge in the superchip. Other masters transferred from the monastery and the Monster Research Institute were busy with the experimental tasks given to them by Fei Yu. In the afternoon, Dean saw 3 ragged girls, who looked 7 or 8 years old, being led to the back hall by a golden-armored wilderness guard. "Sir, the experimental subjects you wanted are here," the golden-armored wilderness guard said respectfully. An old man wearing a white coat and a monocle came forward and soon frowned. He pinched his nose and said, "It stinks. Where did you find them?" "From the slums. They don't have household registration," the golden-armored wilderness guard said respectfully. The old man frowned and waved his hand. "Take them out to wash. Don't send such dirty things here in the future. Don't stain this place." The golden-armored desolate guard jumped in fright and hurriedly said, Yes, I'll take them to wash up. With that said, he grabbed the 3 girls who were looking around in confusion and quickly left the rear hall. Dean, who was lying on the sofa not far away, opened his eyes and watched the scene. After the golden-armored desolate guard left, the old man seemed to be aware of something. He tilted his head and looked at Dean. When their eyes met, the old man's mouth revealed a rich smile. He licked his lips, like a hungry prey appreciating a delicious dinner. Dean closed his eyes and ignored it. At night, the 3 clean little girls were sent into the hall. The old man wearing a monocle led them to a separate laboratory room. Not long after, the little girls' screams and cries could be heard from inside. The voice came abruptly and ended abruptly. Dean slightly frowned, turned around and continued to close his eyes. You are quite honest. Why didn't you go out for a stroll today? Crimson Moon came to Dean's side and said with a smile. Dean opened one eye and glanced at her. Have you finished? Crimson Moon stretched lazily, revealing the slender figure of a lovely young girl. I'm tired from watching, so let's take a break. The people of the old era really do have some redeeming qualities. Perhaps in the future we will be able to create nuclear weapons, conquer the Earth, and reclaim the absolute ruling position of the human race. Dean was too lazy to talk. These things were too far away for him. Crimson Moon's eyes sparkled. She was full of confidence for the future. Seeing that Dean ignored her, she didn't say anything more. Humming a classic song from the old era, she turned around and left. The next day, Dean's first physical examination report came out. The report was sent directly to the desk in Crimson Moon's small room. Dean didn't have a chance to look at it. Instead, he cooperated with Sangba and continued the second specimen collection. Time flew. Dean had been in the back hall for half a month. Every day, he had to complete a specimen collection. Every day, the changes in his body data would be sent to Crimson Moon. He was just like a lab rat in a cage being injected. In this half a month, the golden-armored Desolate Guard had sent some experimental subjects, one after another. Most of them were untouchables from slums without household registration. Even if they died, no one would know, so it was not easy to be investigated. Occasionally, some strong hunters would be sent. The first 3 little girls who were sent here turned into a pile of strange meat on the 3rd day and were dragged out. Their heads were wrapped in the strange meat. They were like dry corpses, screaming as if they were in deep despair. Dean silently watched as batches of experimental products were sent to him. They were turned into piles of failed materials and sent out. For the first time, he clearly felt the horror of the Monster Research Institute. They had been doing such experiments in secret for many years. Life was only a string of data here. There was no additional meaning besides that. It seems that the small intestine of the origami that Biolello had implanted into your body has begun to work. Crimson Moon called Dean to her small room office. In her hand was a stack of 4A paper that recorded the experimental data of Dean's body. She looked up at Dean and said with interest, "Do you feel that the food you ate these days tastes strange?" Dean knew that he was now a lab rat being interrogated. He didn't struggle and said, "I feel that the taste is a bit disgusting." Crimson Moon smiled gently and said, "I can give you a delicious dinner later." Dean didn't care about eating and drinking. He frowned and said, "When are you going to do the experiment for me? What's the hurry?" "I'm not in a hurry." Crimson Moon chuckled and said, "Let's observe for a few months first. We can also experiment with other experimental materials. Amelia's tribe has a lot of ice worms. It's enough to strengthen these experimental materials." Dean's face darkened slightly, but he didn't speak. Crimson Moon saw that he was in a bad mood, so she didn't joke with him anymore. She waved her hand and let him leave. Then she took out the super chip and continued to study. In the evening, Dean saw the delicious that Crimson Moon mentioned. It was a bloody raw steak. He frowned at the first sight, but the next moment, he suddenly found that the fresh blood on the steak looked as tempting as the butter beside the cooked steak. He couldn't help but salivate. The smell of blood wafting from the steak made him feel an indescribable urge, and his appetite was greatly stimulated. He sat down at the dining table and stared at the smell of blood wafting from his plate, causing his nose to itch. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva and thought of Crimson Moon's words. His heart trembled. Is this the change brought about by the origami's small intestine? Does it mean that the origami eat raw meat? Dean shuddered when he thought of the beautiful origami tearing the raw meat with its mouth. After hesitating for a moment, Dean finally raised the knife and fork, cut the raw steak into pieces and ate them. He felt that every piece was delicious. The feeling of blood squeezing out of the beef made him intoxicated. After eating, Dean wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He looked at the empty plate and sighed. What would he become? Chapter 997. 2 months later. In a laboratory in the back hall, Dean and several old men in white coats stood outside a glass window. They saw a serious operation was going on inside, and lying on the operating table was a young man with a square face. His whole body was anesthetized, and he was in a coma. 2 pairs of transparent dragonfly-like wings sprouted from the young man's back. These wings were covered with black wing bones that spread out like veins. At this moment, Fei Yu was personally operating the knife with the help of several old men in white robes. They completely opened up the young man's belly and busied themselves in his abdomen. From time to time, Fei Yu could be seen taking out a small piece of dark yellow intestine and stuffing it into the young man's abdomen. At the same time, she also pulled out a large piece of twisted intestine and internal organs. His stomach was moved to his chest with a piece of intestine. The stomach was slightly deflated, and there was not much food inside. The exorcist family has mixed monster genes and added the flesh and blood of the origami. I don't know what effect it will have. If it can balance the ice and fire magic mark and stimulate new power, it will be great. I hope it will succeed. It's really exciting. We will witness the birth of God with our own eyes. Several old men in white coats looked at the situation in the laboratory and whispered excitedly. Their faces were full of excitement, and their eyes were shining like hungry wolves. Dean frowned slightly. He felt that the words of these old men were a bit harsh. He glanced at them, and the murderous look in his eyes caught the old men's attention. Seeing Dean looking at them with a bad expression, they immediately retreated to the side, not daring to explain or contradict Dean. After all, Dean was the only rare experimental subject, and they could be replaced. If Dean really killed them, Crimson Moon would not avenge them. After they retreated, Dean's eyes turned to the laboratory. He secretly prayed that Crimson Moon or someone else made a mistake and caused the experiment to fail. Once this experiment was successful, it meant that Crimson Moon's God creation experiment was one step closer. It would not be long before this set of experiments was used on him. Soon, his prayer was successful. No one made a mistake, but when Crimson Moon was stitching up the square-faced youth's belly, he suddenly woke up from the anesthesia. His eyes were bloodshot and looked as if they were about to pop out of their sockets as he let out an angry and ferocious roar. Blue veins bulged on his neck, but they were incomparably dark. The next moment, the square-faced young man's abdomen swelled up, and the half-stitched wound burst open, spraying dark green blood. Crimson Moon reacted quickly and pulled up her sterilized white gown to block the blood. Several holes were immediately burned into her white gown, as if the blood was actually acid. The old men in white coats were not so lucky. Although they had been researching and experimenting all year round, their physiques were not that strong. Moreover, it happened so suddenly. They were instantly splashed with dark green blood. One by one, they screamed and wailed in agony. They covered their faces and rolled on the ground, knocking over the surgical carts around them. Various types of scalpels, forceps, vices, and other tools for different needs were scattered on the ground. Whoosh! As the dark green blood splashed out, a few strange dark green limbs suddenly sprang out of the square-faced young man's abdomen. They looked like arthropods with sharp barbs on them. As they wriggled, they struck another old man in a white coat who was slightly closer. The barbs hooked onto the old man's waist and sent him flying. Crimson Moon frowned slightly as a cold light flashed in front of her eyes. She didn't even make a move, but a streak of silver light swept past several of the monstrous limbs, causing them to fall to the ground. Dark green blood flowed out of them and corroded the metal floor, leaving behind potholes. Squeak, squeak! A sharp cry came from the square-faced young man's abdomen. A bloody head the size of a fist protruded from inside. It had a tortoise-like shell on top of its head and a single eye. Its facial structure looked like a human's face with a nose and lips arranged under the eye. It had no eyebrows, a sharp nose, and a huge mouth. The corners of the mouth were split all the way to the ears, revealing sharp teeth as it screamed. This thing quickly noticed Crimson Moon in front of it and immediately rushed towards her. Crimson Moon frowned slightly. A metal can had appeared in her hand out of nowhere. As the little thing leaped out, she swung her hand and with a bang, the metal can was quickly sealed. Bang! Bang! The little monster's strength was so great that the metal can bulged slightly as if it would break out at any time. Crimson Moon stared at it and saw that it struggled for a moment inside the metal can. After a few minutes, it gradually weakened and became calm again. "It's dead." Dean breathed a sigh of relief. Crimson Moon frowned and twisted the metal can open. Whoosh! Suddenly, a bloody shadow flashed and jumped out of the can like a monkey, pouncing on Crimson Moon's face. Crimson Moon quickly raised her hand, pinched it, and stuffed it back into the metal can. She sealed it again, and then placed it in a groove on another experiment table that was embedded in the ground. The metal can was just right in the groove. No matter how hard it struggled, the metal can did not move. Crimson Moon looked at the old men in white coats who were rolling on the ground and moaning. Her expression was as indifferent as ever. She said, "All of you get out. Clean your bodies and receive treatment." Her words seemed to have a kind of magic power, causing the screaming old men in white coats to stop struggling. They were sweating profusely. Gritting their teeth, they covered their festering faces and turned to leave the laboratory. "How could it fail? Kern, are you okay? Quick, I'll take you to the treatment room." Several old men who were waiting next to them immediately greeted them and took the injured old men away. Only Crimson Moon and the little monster in the metal can were left in the laboratory. The square-faced young man seemed to be dead. His body was not moving at all. Dean used his X-ray vision to look at him and saw that the heat source in his body was quickly dissipating. Many of the blood vessels in his body had actually shrunk and were wrinkled as if they were dried. The magic marks on his left shoulder and chest had long disappeared. After looking for a moment, Dean roughly guessed the origin of the little monster. It should be the magic marks in his body. Too many active origami cells were injected, causing it to engulf his own body. Instead, it used his body as an ovary and the magic marks inside as a tonic to give birth to a new life. Dean's eyes were full of dignity. Creating life, since ancient times, this was the ability and power of God. However, at this moment, Crimson Moon did it. She touched the forbidden area that could only be seen but not reached. Although the experiment had failed, this alone was enough for him to be proud of. Chapter 998. In the laboratory, Crimson Moon didn't directly throw away the body of the youth. After a moment of silence, she took out the instrument and dissected the body. She extracted samples from the body. After the examination of each specimen was completed and the results were recorded in the experimental data, Crimson Moon ordered someone to dispose of the rest of the garbage, and then took the little monster in the metal jar to another laboratory. Time flew. The experiment in the back hall was in full swing. Every day there were experimental materials being sent. The magistrate who was responsible for maintaining justice inside the giant wall had become Crimson Moon's subordinate. Dean stayed in the back hall and knew nothing about the outside. But he didn't hear any news from Noyce and Barton. For him, it was the best news. He hoped that they could endure. Her Majesty Crimson Moon wants you to go and test your body, Samba whispered behind Dean. Dean's eyes retracted from the window. From the progress of the experiment in the past few days, he knew that this day was coming. After a large number of repeated experiments, Crimson Moon's God creation plan was close to perfection. It would be implemented on him. Fortunately, his preparation was completed. Go. Dean turned and followed Samba. Samba came to the laboratory. As before, he did the body test for Dean. An old man in white coat came over and called Dean to go to Crimson Moon's office. Are you looking for me? Dean opened the door and saw Crimson Moon sitting in front of a stack of experimental materials. She closed the door. Crimson Moon didn't raise her head. Are you ready? Is it about to start? Dean narrowed his eyes. Crimson Moon's gaze lifted from the report in her hand. She looked at Dean and suddenly smiled. You're very calm. It seems that you're mentally prepared. Anyone else would be numb after such a long time. Dean indifferently said. Crimson Moon smiled. Others won't have such an opportunity. Once you succeed, you will be a living god. I hope so. Dean didn't express his opinion. Crimson Moon quickly read the report and threw it on the thick experimental materials. Sit here. Dean's eyes flashed slightly, and he sat on the sofa in front of her desk. Let me see what you've been thinking all this time. With a smile on her face, Crimson Moon naturally sat beside Dean. Her body exuded a faint orchid fragrance, which floated into Dean's nose and seeped into his heart. Dean didn't resist as she stretched out her snow-white hand. He just quietly looked into her eyes. Crimson Moon's small hand was very cold and very soft. When it touched Dean's forehead, he felt a slight tingling sensation. Then, Dean felt his vision was suddenly pulled into darkness. His body fell infinitely and then fell into eternal darkness. Intense pain surged from the boundless darkness. He tried his best to endure it, but the pain soon exceeded the limit of his endurance, and he immediately fainted. Crimson Moon frowned slightly and opened her eyes. Looking at Dean, who had fainted on the sofa, her eyes flashed with a strange color. She quickly closed her eyes again. After a few minutes, she opened her eyes again. There was a bit of surprise on her face, and then she pursed her lips and smiled. Sure enough, you're a person who can't let down your guard for a moment. Your resistance is really tenacious. In such a desperate mood you can actually have such a wonderful idea. You want to hypnotize me? Unfortunately, as soon as you think about it, I can see through it. Fortunately, I didn't mess up the sequence and directly watch from the back. Otherwise, I might have been tricked. She looked at the young man with admiration. The more she understood, the more she admired Dean. She thought that if she was in his shoes, she would never think of such a strange resistance method in such a desperate situation. Moreover, this method was not completely ineffective. If she was careless and directly watched Dean's memory from the back randomly and saw the hypnosis part, she might really be hypnotized. At that time, she would be countered by Dean. This trick almost turned Dean from a captive to a master. She really didn't expect that her ability to read memories would be found by Dean. This man was too terrible. While sighing, she couldn't help but feel a bit of fear in her heart. This man really couldn't let people relax a little. No matter how great the adversity was, it was possible for him to find a gap to drill out, only to eliminate the trouble forever. Her eyes flashed, and she slowly closed her eyes. After a while, she withdrew her hand, got up, and poured herself a glass of water. She sat back on the sofa and drank quietly. There was a slight sweat on her forehead. The pain faded from the darkness, and Dean felt a little warm. He slowly woke up and opened his eyes. He saw Crimson Moon sitting beside him and drinking tea. His eyes suddenly showed a bit of surprise and gentleness, and he hugged Crimson Moon. Crimson Moon was not surprised and let Dean hold her in his arms. She chuckled and said, "We just left for a while, and you're already so reluctant." Dean buried his head in her neck, took a deep breath, and smelled the girl's body fragrance. He said softly, "Even if it's just for a minute, I don't want to." Dean smiled and gently pushed him away, saying, "Don't be like this, we still have things to do. We have to do the experiment tomorrow. You have to rest tonight, and don't let your imagination run wild." Dean grinned, "I only miss you." Crimson Moon's cheeks were slightly red. Although she knew that this was the result of memory modification, it was the first time she was treated like this. From Dean's eyes, tone, and expression, she could see that he was sincere from the bottom of his heart. Suddenly, she was a little jealous of Aisha, who had turned into a corpse king. They were also the products of the experiment. Why could she get such love? However, this jealousy came and went quickly. She was too lazy to argue with an undead. When the experiment is successful, this world will be ours. Crimson Moon held Dudien's cheek and looked at his handsome and delicate face. Thinking of all the things this man had experienced since he was a child, her heart pounded slightly. She said softly, "When we conquer the world, I will accompany you to the highest mountain to see the most beautiful sunset." Dean looked at her with the same gentleness. "We will all be immortal." Crimson Moon smiled slightly, and her mind could not help but recall their long and romantic life. She whispered, "No matter how many experiments I create in the future, you will be my one and only, irreplaceable. You too." Dean looked at her affectionately. Crimson Moon's body was slightly hot under his gaze. She suddenly bowed her head, kissed his lips gently, and then retreated like a dragonfly skimming the water. When Dean came back to his senses, she was standing behind the desk, like an innocent young girl, with a touch of shyness on her face. "You go out first." Dean touched his lips in a daze. After a long time, he responded with a smile, got up and left the office. Before closing the door, he said with concern, "Don't stay up late. I will adjust my state to the best and help you complete your experiment." Crimson Moon gently nodded. After the door was closed, the blush on Crimson Moon's face slowly receded. She fell into contemplation. After a long time, she shook her head slightly and no longer thought about it. She continued to read the previous experimental materials. After Dean came out, he went to eat dinner and then returned to his sleeping place. It was already late. He looked at the stars in the sky and listened to the busy experimenters carrying out the final instrument tests tonight. The starlight was reflected on the windowsill. He looked at it quietly, a little lost in thought. Early the next morning, all the experimenters were present. The atmosphere in the entire back hall was obviously different than before. It was extraordinarily serious. All the experimenters were very solemn. When Dean got up, someone immediately took him to take a bath. After taking a bath, he put on a sterilized antibacterial suit and came to the largest laboratory in the back hall. Chapter 999. You're here. Crimson Moon came out of the laboratory. Today, she was wearing a pure white coat and a mask. Only her eyes exposed on the mask could let people feel her beauty. Dean's eyes lit up when he saw her, and his originally nervous body quickly relaxed. "Are you ready?" Crimson Moon looked at him tenderly, with a trace of tenderness in her eyes. Dean took a deep breath, and a confident smile appeared on his mouth, saying, "I'm ready. I believe you can do it." Crimson Moon looked at him deeply. "I will." The laboratory was very empty. There were not many instruments, but they were relatively complex. In the middle of the laboratory was a metal platform, surrounded by scanners, dialysis mirrors, and other equipment. Dean glanced at it and sighed in his heart. Although he had the knowledge in the superchip, it was not easy to make these things in a short time. However, this was also because of the rise in the overall industrial technology of Sylvia. In the 2 years he served as the Wall Lord, electricity had been popularized. Under the industrial development driven by electricity, the progress was very rapid, so that Crimson Moon had the capital to smelt the appropriate materials to make these things in a short time, and the manpower invested in it was estimated to be beyond his imagination. Under the guidance of Crimson Moon, Dean lay on the metal platform. Crimson Moon put on the mask again, her expression solemn. She looked at Dean and saw the trust in each other's eyes. "Don't be nervous, come on." Dean comforted her softly. Crimson Moon nodded slightly, took a deep breath, and told the 5 old men around her who had followed her for many days, "Get ready." The eyes of the 5 people flashed with excitement. They had been waiting for this day for several months. This was the moment to witness a great miracle, and they were the creators of the miracle. They had carried out the same experiment many times, and all the procedures and processes had long been memorized. It was just that today they had changed the subject, and this subject was the last and most precious experimental subject. There was no room for failure. Despite the excitement, the 5 people behaved more cautiously than before. Anesthesia. Bone knife. Crimson Moon untied the antibacterial suit on Dean's body, revealing his white and strong chest. Even if he was lying down, the outline of his six-pack could be seen. Dean did not deliberately pursue a perfect body, but after fighting for a long time, his body naturally became healthy and beautiful. The 5 old men acted as assistants and handed various scalpels to Crimson Moon. Anesthesia, cut open the belly, support with a stent, and move the internal organs. Crimson Moon's movements were skillful and her eyes were calm and focused. She was accustomed to the bloody scene in front of her. It didn't take long for her to complete the prelude to the operation and construct a new magic mark ovary inside Dean's body. "Soul worm," Crimson Moon ordered. A white-robed old man immediately handed over a transparent jar that was used to seal a soul worm. Inside the jar was a curled-up soul worm that seemed to be in a bad mood. It looked like a scale and was rectangular in shape. Its body was almost transparent, with only a few flame-like red threads twining around its body. This was a soul worm brought from the eastern continent. In addition to the ability of the soul worm itself, it also had a flame attribute. However, if this soul worm was bred alone, the flame attribute it carried would basically be equivalent to nothing, and it would be classified as a recessive attribute. Only when it coexisted with the soul worm from the Shunluo Empire would the flame attribute become dominant, and conflict would arise. Dean felt that the parts below his neck had lost feeling, and the anesthesia was slowly extending to his brain. His thoughts were a little slow, and his head was dizzy from time to time. From time to time, his vision darkened due to insufficient blood supply. He glanced at the transparent scale-like soul worm from the corner of his eyes. He could see many fine whiskers on its body, like countless thin feet. He asked Crimson Moon about the origin of this soul worm. Sun Beast. The eastern continent gave the soul worm its name, not the word swordsman. This soul worm was taken from the body of the Sun Beast, and its main function was related to light and heat. According to Crimson Moon, the Sun Beast was an extremely rare monster. It was extremely strong, especially good at long-range attacks, but its close combat ability was also terrifying. It had almost no flaws, the only weakness was its fear of the dark. At night, the strength of the Sun Beast would plummet. Among the many soul worms of the eastern continent that Crimson Moon had collected, this Sun Beast soul worm was one of the best. Dean could see that Crimson Moon had held nothing back in this experiment. Although it was not a desperate attempt, she had done everything she could. Soon, the Sun Beast soul worm was sent into Dean's abdomen by Crimson Moon. As if smelling the blood, the listless soul worm suddenly recovered its vitality and quickly drilled into the magic mark ovary in Dean's abdomen. Soon, the blood vessels were agitated, and a large amount of blood gushed out like water, converging into the nest. Seeing that the artificially constructed nest had stabilized the soul worm, Crimson Moon was relieved. At this point, the experiment had basically succeeded by 1/3. "God's blood," Crimson Moon said. An old man next to her quickly handed over a small bottle of black blood that was as thick as a finger. Crimson Moon inhaled it with a syringe and injected it into Dean's heart. Soon, the black blood flowed along the blood vessels into Dean's heart, dyeing the red heart black. Then, as the heart pumped, it quickly spread to the whole body. The color of all the blood vessels became dim, including Dean's lips. In an instant, the color gradually deepened and became black. Dean could not see the changes in his body, but he suddenly felt a swelling pain in his brain. His body felt extremely hot. He had been anesthetized and unconscious, but at this moment, he seemed to have regained control of his body. The huge heat made his scalp tingle, but soon, there was an extremely cold chill in this high temperature, starting from his right arm and quickly climbing all over his body, suppressing the heat. However, this hot feeling was not to be outdone and quickly rose again. The cold and the boiling heat quickly alternated. Dean felt that his brain was so swollen that he could not think, and his brain was aching. His vision was already dark, and he could not see anything. He felt as if his body had fallen into a dark vortex, constantly sinking. The raging god's blood seems to have flowed into his brain. An old man exclaimed in a low voice. He raised his hand to prop up Dean's closed eyes, but there was no reaction from his eyeballs. Crimson Moon was busy with Dean's abdomen. She did not raise her head and said, "Don't worry, the uranium ring on his neck can block the god's blood. The blood that flowed into his brain is just the mutated blood infected by the god's blood. It does not have the attack characteristic of self-devouring." The old man was relieved. At this moment, he heard Crimson Moon shout again, "No, quickly, prepare the cold crystals." They looked over and suddenly saw a strange scene. Half of Dean's body was frozen, and the other half was red like fire. Two different temperatures occupied half of Dean's body. In the middle of these two extreme temperatures, the skin had begun to fester. Under the battle of ice and fire, the cold and high temperature, the gene chain was close to collapse, and the body could not bear it. How could this be? They could not believe it, and their eyes widened. Although such a situation had occurred in their previous experiments, they had improved it and used God's blood to stabilize this state. Why did it fail now? At this time, Crimson Moon grabbed the cold crystal and quickly cut it open. She inhaled the cold liquid inside into a syringe and injected it into the hot left half of Dean's body. Soon, the temperature of the left half of Dean's body gradually decreased, but soon it became hot again, and it was even hotter than before. Crimson Moon's face was ugly. The magic marks don't match, and the Sun Beast soul worm wants to swallow the splitter. Damn it! She had previously encountered a situation where the soul worm did not match the experimental body's soul worm, but under the stability of the god's blood, the two were quickly suppressed. But this time the situation was obviously different. She suddenly realized that the previous situation could be suppressed by the god's blood because the previous experimental soul worms were too ordinary, and the Sun Beast soul worm and the Splitter soul worm were both top soul worms. Especially the Sun Beast soul worm, it was only slightly inferior to her Dream Breeder soul worm, but it was much stronger than the Splitter soul worm. Under normal circumstances, the Splitter soul worm did not have the power to fight at all and could not form a balance. But she knew that Dean's Splitter soul worm was a strengthened version of the soul worm that had swallowed its own kind, and it had also swallowed the origami factor. It belonged to the real deified and strengthened Splitter soul worm. and this deified characteristic was enough to make the splitter even more extreme. According to the Empire's 5-star soul worm ranking system, the deified splitter could be listed in the 5-star category. Although it could not be ranked in the top of the 5-star category, it could be regarded as one of the top soul worms. But she did not expect that under such circumstances, it still could not suppress the sun beast soul worm. Soon, Crimson Moon came to a realization. The sun beast soul worm was very likely to have absorbed the god's blood and completed its deification. Therefore, its quality, which was originally higher than the splitter, was improved again. It was already one of the best among the 5-star soul worms. Chapter 1000. Body disintegration had occurred many times in the previous experiment. Crimson Moon had already found a way to deal with it, so she didn't panic. She asked the assistant to take another bottle of God's blood and injected it into the middle of Dean's body. The black God's blood flowed into the rotten and collapsed flesh, and the effect soon appeared. The rotten and collapsed flesh quickly metamorphosed, and pink flesh was born inside. After the new flesh appeared, the surface of the rotten and collapsed skin quickly lost its luster and dimmed. Then, like dust and mud, it slowly faded and no longer emitted a stench. It was like the mud that had been rubbed out after not bathing for many years. At Crimson Moon's instruction, the assistant immediately shoveled out the completely necrotic flesh. At this time, it was obvious that there was a black line in the middle of Dean's body, isolating the two kinds of body temperature and dividing the boundary. Although the experiment was a bit thrilling, it was still under control. There were no accidents beyond the previous experimental data. Crimson Moon and the old men were all relieved. They carefully injected Dean with various antibiotics and the latest stabilizers while quietly waiting for Dean's body to fuse on its own. After the body has recovered to a constant temperature, prepare to suture. Pay attention to the content of God's blood in the target's body. Crimson Moon calmly ordered. The experiment was basically 2/3 complete. The next step was to test Dean's self-characteristic. Under the injection of a large number of top antibiotics extracted from various monsters, Dean's body temperature was slowly recovering. The temperature of the cold body on the right gradually rose, the temperature of the red skin on the left gradually dropped, and the black line of God's blood in the middle of his body gradually faded. The three gradually sank into Dean's body, and strange changes occurred. Seeing this, Crimson Moon's heart was at ease. The God's blood and the double magic marks had reached a balance in Dean's body. At this moment, Dean's body was no different from her own. Her body, in Burroughs' words, was called a god's fetus, only one step away from becoming a god. However, this next key step was the real result of her months of experiments, and here she needed to use the characteristics of Dean's body from the old era, a pure body with low radiation and supergenetic stability. After going through Dean's memory, Crimson Moon knew that Dean's preciousness was more important than what Burrough had thought. It could be said that he was unique. This wasn't only because he was an olden-era life form. Regardless of whether it was his past or the 300 years of slumber in the freezer, it was enough to see that his body was different from the masses. Only she knew that the freezer was not a mature work. Ordinary people would never be able to sleep in it for such a long time. When it exceeded a person's critical point, the long period of low-temperature freezing would completely freeze a person's life. Even if they were lucky enough to wake up, their brain function would not recover
Crimson Moon
completely.
slightly frowned.
The possibility
She did
of
not
them
expect
becoming an
that
idiot
Dean would
or mentally
encounter
retarded
all the negative
was as
symptoms
high
they
as
had encountered
90%.
before.
After
First,
all, the
human
human
brain
brain
was
was
too
too
mysterious,
mysterious, almost
it
caused
contained
his body
consciousness,
to be torn apart,
soul,
and
and
now
thought.
there was aging.
These were all mysteries
Fortunately,
that
she had
scientists
encountered
had not
both
been
of them
able
before,
to solve until
and
now.
she had already
For
found
example,
a solution.
why did humans
She
dream?
immediately ordered,
How did human
inject the
consciousness
nutrient
come
solution
about?
and the
How did
divine
human
serum
thoughts
of
come
life.
about?
The
Where
origami
was the
factor
soul?
and the magic
These were
mark in
all
his body
unsolvable
are competing
mysteries.
with each other,
Dean's
and
parents
devouring
might
his
have
body.
considered the possibility
Use these
of
to
Dean
resist
becoming an
first,
idiot,
and when
so
his
they
body
recorded
most of the
stabilizes,
important
he will
knowledge of the
recover.
old era,
Several
especially
old
the
men
industrial
quickly
followed
followed
her
in
instructions.
the form of text
When Dean
and
aged to
pictures
more
in
than
the
60 years
superchip.
old,
Even
the
if Dean
nutrient
became an
solution and the
idiot,
divine
he
serum
might
of life
be able
had
to
been
rely
injected,
on the knowledge
and the
in the
aging
chip to
speed
recover
quickly
some
slowed down
intelligence.
and gradually
Even if he was
stabilized.
too idiotic to learn,
You're tuning
it didn't
in to
matter.
the Phoenix Nights
If the chip
YouTube
fell
channel.
into the hands of
Don't
other
forget
survivors,
to subscribe.
it could
and
also
join us
play
on
a
this
great
journey
role
to catch
in
the most
rebuilding
captivating
human
stories
civilizations
and restoring its brilliance. This was what Crimson Moon thought, and she felt that her guess was not far from the truth. This poor man thought that he had pinned all of his parents' hopes on him, but in fact, his parents only had a glimmer of hope